My name is Gemma, 34 years old, and the CEO of a global artificial intelligence logistics firm. 18 years ago, I stood frozen in the middle of Terminal 4 at JFK Airport, watching my mother Beverly walk away toward a first-class gate with her new family. She had just shoved two crumpled $100 bills into my chest. "Take a cab back to the house," she had said, her voice flat and completely devoid of emotion. The resort in the Maldives is strictly for adults and Harrison's biological children. They have a very specific policy. You are 16, you can handle feeding yourself for 2 weeks. I had stared at the money then, up at the woman who had spent my entire childhood complaining about how my existence ruined her youth. I told her I did not even have a key to Harrison's mansion. She simply shrugged, adjusting her designer sunglasses. "Ask the housekeeper to let you into the garage," she replied, already walking away. "Do not make a scene and embarrass me here." I did not cry. Crying around Beverly only ever resulted in punishment. Instead, I stood by a trash can and gripped the two bills. For as long as I could remember, Beverly had drilled into my head that my biological father, Donovan, was a deadbeat loser who abandoned us to live in poverty. She claimed he never paid a dime of child support, which was why I had to wear thrift store clothes while my new half-sister Kelsey got custom dresses. With nothing left to lose, I took out my cheap prepaid phone and dialed the number I had secretly memorized from an old address book. It rang twice before a deep, steady voice answered. "Dad," I said, my voice finally cracking. "It is Gemma. I am stranded at JFK." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Stay exactly where you are," he ordered. "I am coming." I braced myself to wait hours for a beat-up truck to pull up to the curb. Instead, exactly 45 minutes later, a team of men in dark suits approached me. One of them respectfully took my suitcase. I followed them in a daze, bypassing the chaotic public exits and stepping directly into the VIP private aviation terminal. There, standing in front of a gleaming Gulfstream private jet, was Donovan. He was not wearing rags. He was wearing a bespoke suit, looking every inch the quiet billionaire he actually was. He pulled me into a fierce embrace. And right there on the tarmac, he showed me the bank statements on his phone. He had been sending $5,000 a month for 10 years. Beverly had pocketed every single cent to fund her social climbing lifestyle. 2 weeks later, Beverly and Harrison returned from the Maldives. They walked into a perfectly silent house. My room was stripped bare. Pinned to the center of Beverly's expensive silk pillow were the $200 bills she had given me, right next to a subpoena from Donovan's legal team, demanding full restitution of $600,000 in stolen child support. Now, 18 years later, I sat in my corner glass office overlooking the Manhattan skyline. The hum of the city below was completely muted by the soundproof glass. My assistant Liam walked in, carefully placing a heavy gold-plated envelope on my desk. It had arrived by private courier. I picked it up, feeling the expensive cardstock between my fingers. It was an invitation to the wedding of Kelsey, my 26-year-old half-sister, the golden child who had never worked a day in her life. The venue listed was the Pinnacle Club, the most exclusive and ridiculously overpriced private society in New York. I opened the envelope, and a small pink sticky note fluttered out. I recognized Beverly's sharp, aggressive handwriting immediately. The note read, "I know you are struggling as a secretary somewhere. Come to the service entrance in the back. Do not wear cheap clothes and embarrass Kelsey's future in-laws, the Montgomery family." I read the note twice. A cold, genuine smile spread across my face. Beverly still believed her own fictional narrative. She still needed me to be the failure so she could feel successful. She had no idea that I had spent the last decade building a tech empire, or that I had taken my father's investment firm to heights even he had not imagined. She certainly did not know that my company's latest real estate acquisition portfolio included several prime properties in Manhattan. I dropped the sticky note onto the desk right next to the finalized acquisition contract I had signed just 48 hours prior, the contract for the outright purchase of the Pinnacle Club. "Liam," I said, my voice perfectly level as I handed the invitation back to him. "Notify Mr. Dalton, the general manager at the Pinnacle Club, Tell him the new owner is making a surprise inspection this evening. Ensure my name is kept completely off the public guest registry. I looked past Richard Montgomery's shoulder-locking eyes with Beverly and Kelsey. Their jaws were slack, their eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief as the reality of who I actually was finally began to crash down upon them. The tires of my matte black Maybach glided to a silent halt against the curb of Fifth Avenue. The Pinnacle Club towered above me. It was a fortress of limestone and wrought iron, an exclusive sanctuary where Manhattan's elite paid hundreds of thousands of dollars a year just for the privilege of walking through its heavy mahogany front doors. I stepped out into the crisp evening air. My custom-tailored midnight blue suit felt like a second skin. I did not wear jewelry save for a simple Patek Philippe watch. True power never needs to sparkle to be noticed. I walked up the marble steps, my heels clicking with quiet, measured authority. At the top of the stairs, a hulking security guard stepped directly into my path. He crossed his arms over his chest, his radio buzzing quietly on his shoulder. His name tag read, Marcus. He carried that specific brand of borrowed arrogance common among people who guard the wealthy but possess no wealth themselves. Name he demanded, not bothering to offer a polite greeting. He looked me up and down, clearly assessing that my lack of flashy designer logos meant I was nobody important. Gemma. I replied, my voice steady and cold. Marcus pulled a digital tablet from his belt and tapped the screen with a thick finger. He frowned, swiped down, and let out a short, dismissive breath. You are not on the main guest list. Check again, I told him. He rolled his eyes, clearly annoyed that I had dared to give him an instruction. He navigated to a different tab on his screen. His lips curled into a condescending smirk. Ah, here we are. You are not a guest. You are listed under the catering and technical support staff. He turned the tablet around so I could see the screen. Right there under my name was a digital sticky note flagged in bright red. I recognized the phrasing instantly. It was pure Beverly. The note read, Guest of the mother of the bride. Send directly to the service elevator. Do not allow in the main lobby under any circumstances. She is prone to making a scene and her attire will disturb the legitimate guests. A bitter, familiar taste rose in the back of my throat, but I swallowed it down instantly. Beverly had not changed a single bit in 18 years. Standing on those marble steps, the crisp New York wind biting at my face, I was suddenly 17 again. I remembered the night Beverly hosted a massive real estate gala for Harrison at their mansion. She had forced me to sit in the unheated detached garage for 6 straight hours in the middle of December. She claimed my thrift store sweater would ruin the aesthetic of her high society dinner party. I had sat on a concrete floor shivering under a single flickering bulb, studying for my exams, while the muffled sounds of clinking crystal and laughter drifted from the main house. She had treated me like an embarrassing secret to be hidden away in the dark. Now she was attempting to do the exact same thing at the most exclusive club in Manhattan. She wanted to shove me through a service door next to the dumpsters, hoping to break my spirit and remind me of my place at the absolute bottom of her hierarchy. Listen carefully, Lady Marcus said, breaking my train of thought. He pointed a thick finger toward a dark alleyway adjacent to the building. The service entrance is around the back. Grab your tools or whatever you brought and head down that alley. If you try to step foot through these mahogany doors, I will have you arrested for trespassing. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I simply lifted my left wrist and looked at the dial of my watch. You have exactly 30 seconds to step aside and open those doors for me. Marcus let out a loud barking laugh. He unclipped the radio from his shoulder. You have some nerve, caterer. We deal with crazy people trying to crash parties here every single week. I am calling backup. You are going to be banned from the premises completely. 20 seconds, I said, keeping my eyes locked on the sweeping second hand of my watch. Marcus keyed his radio. Hey, Command. I have a delusional staff member at the front entrance refusing to use the service alley. Send a couple of guys up here to escort her to the street. 10 seconds. I announced, finally looking up to meet his gaze. I suggest you reconsider your tone, Marcus. Your employment status depends entirely on the next 10 seconds. You are out of your mind, he sneered. stepping closer to physically intimidate me. "You do not belong here. Go back to whatever cheap kitchen you crawled out of before I physically throw you out." 3, 2, 1. The heavy mahogany double doors behind him burst open with a violent crash. The heavy wood struck the stone wall, vibrating on its hinges. Mr. Dalton, the famously unflappable general manager of the Pinnacle Club, sprinted out onto the landing. His usually immaculate tuxedo was rumpled. His tie hung crookedly around his neck. He was sweating profusely, panting for breath as if he had just run up 6 flights of stairs. He took one look at Marcus, who was reaching out to grab my shoulder, and let out a strangled shout of pure panic. Dalton lunged forward, striking Marcus's hand away with a resounding slap that echoed off the limestone walls. "Are you completely insane?" Dalton screamed, his voice cracking with terror. "Get your hands off her right now!" Marcus stumbled back, clutching his wrist, his eyes wide with shock. "Mr. Dalton, she is just a caterer. The bride's mother specifically said to send her to the alley." "Shut up!" Dalton roared, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "Shut your stupid mouth before you ruin us all." Dalton spun around to face me. He did not just bow. He folded his entire body in half, bending at a strict 90-degree angle. His hands trembled at his sides. Chairman Gemma Dalton gasped, his voice shaking with absolute reverence. "I am so profoundly sorry. I was in the sub-basement checking the wine cellar when your assistant's message arrived. I ran up as fast as I could. Please forgive the complete ignorance of this fool." Marcus stood paralyzed. His jaw dropped open. He looked from his boss to me, the color draining rapidly from his face. "Chairman?" He whispered the word, barely making it past his lips. Dalton straightened up, glaring at the security guard. "You idiot! The acquisition papers were finalized 48 hours ago. Vanguard Logistics purchased this entire property. Chairman Gemma owns the building, the land, and every single inch of this club. You just threatened to arrest the owner for trespassing on her own property." The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. The only sound was the distant wail of a police siren miles away. Marcus shrank back against the wall, looking as though he wanted the marble floor to open up and swallow him whole. He opened his mouth to apologize, but no sound came out. I ignored him entirely. I focused my gaze on the general manager. "Mr. Dalton," I said smoothly, "leave this guard exactly where he is for the rest of the evening. Do not fire him yet. I want him to stand at this door and watch me walk through it." "Yes, Chairman." Immediately, Chairman Dalton stammered, rushing to pull the massive doors wide open for me. I stepped over the threshold, moving from the freezing night air into the warm golden glow of the club's grand lobby. The air inside smelled of expensive orchids and old money. "Where is the sterling engagement party currently being held?" I asked, smoothing the lapel of my suit. "In the Grand Astor Ballroom on the 2nd floor," Dalton replied quickly, walking half a step behind me to guide the way. "Shall I announce your arrival, Chairman?" "No," I said, a cold smile touching the corners of my mouth. "Do not announce me. Just open the ballroom doors. I want to surprise my mother. I have a feeling she is going to be absolutely thrilled to see me." The heavy double doors of the Grand Astor Ballroom stood wide open. I stepped inside, the thick carpet silencing my footsteps. Thousands of white orchids dripped from the ceiling, and massive ice sculptures caught the light of the crystal chandeliers. I scanned the sea of designer gowns and tailored tuxedos, my eyes immediately locking onto my target. Beverly, Harrison, and Kelsey were standing near the center of the room. They had successfully cornered Mrs. Eleanor Montgomery, the formidable matriarch of the groom's family. Eleanor was known throughout Manhattan for her rigid standards and ruthless social gatekeeping. Beverly was practically vibrating with desperate energy, holding a glass of champagne and leaning in far too close to Eleanor. I stepped closer, positioning myself just behind a towering floral arrangement perfectly within earshot. "Oh yes, Kelsey has always been our perfect angel," Beverly boasted. Her voice dripped with an artificial sweetness that made my stomach turn. "She has never caused us a single day of grief. She graduated top of her class, completely devoted to family values. We raised her to understand the importance of legacy." Eleanor took a slow, measured sip of her wine. "I understand you have an older daughter as well, Beverly. She is not in attendance tonight. Beverly let out a practiced, heavy sigh. She placed a hand over her heart, performing the role of the tragic, long-suffering mother flawlessly. It breaks my heart to even speak of her, Eleanor. My oldest daughter was completely ruined from childhood. I tried everything: therapy, private tutors, endless patience. But she was a delinquent. She ran away from home at 16 to live on the streets. She stole from us, got involved with the wrong crowd, and completely cut ties. It was a tragedy, but Harrison and I had to protect Kelsey from her toxic influence. She is the total opposite of my sweet Kelsey. We simply had to let her go for the safety of our home. Kelsey chimed in, adopting a faux sympathetic pout. It was so hard for me growing up, Mrs. Montgomery. I loved my sister, but she was so volatile. She used to scream at my mother and demand money. She just wanted to party and drain my parents' bank accounts. Mom cried for months when she left, but we had to move on. Eleanor shook her head, her face set in a mask of stern judgment. How dreadful for you both. It is a shame when a bad seed infects a good family. You did the right thing by cutting her off. Wealth and status cannot fix a fundamentally broken character. I listened to this beautifully orchestrated fiction. My pulse remained steady, but a cold fire ignited in my chest. They were standing in a ballroom paid for by Harrison's mounting debts, wearing clothes bought on credit, actively assassinating my character to secure their place in high society. I stepped out from behind the floral arrangement. I picked up a full glass of champagne from a passing waiter's tray and walked directly into their intimate circle. I placed the crystal glass down on the marble cocktail table between them. The glass hit the stone with a sharp, echoing clink that cut through Beverly's fake sorrow like a gunshot. It is truly surprising you are alive and well after eating so much grief, Mother, I said, my voice projecting clearly over the background music. The entire group froze. Beverly's head snapped toward me. The artificial smile slid off her face so fast it was almost comical. All the color drained from her cheeks, leaving her designer foundation looking like a pale mask. The champagne glass in her hand began to tremble, spilling a few drops of expensive wine onto her silk dress. Kelsey's faux sympathetic pout morphed instantly into a snarl. She took a step back, her eyes darting nervously toward her future mother-in-law. Gemma Beverly choked out, her voice barely a whisper. "What are you doing here? You are not supposed to be in this room. You are supposed to be at the back." Eleanor Montgomery raised an eyebrow, looking me up and down. Her gaze took in my custom-tailored midnight blue suit and the quiet confidence in my posture. She did not see a street delinquent. She saw an equal. "Beverly," Eleanor said, her tone icy. "Who is this woman?" Before Beverly could scramble for another lie, I extended my hand to the matriarch. "I am Gemma, the delinquent runaway daughter who supposedly drained their bank accounts. It is a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Montgomery." Eleanor did not shake my hand, but she did not look away either. She simply watched the chaos unfold with a sharp, calculating gaze. "You need to leave immediately," Kelsey hissed, stepping forward and pointing a manicured finger at my chest. "You are ruining my engagement party. You have no right to be here. Security is going to drag you out by your hair." I ignored Kelsey entirely and kept my eyes locked on Beverly. The terror in my mother's eyes was intoxicating. She knew exactly what I held over her, and she knew I had zero hesitation about using it. "You told Mrs. Montgomery that I ran away to live on the streets," I said, my voice conversational yet loud enough for the neighboring guests to hear. The surrounding tables fell silent. People turned their heads, their conversations halting instantly as the drama magnetized their attention. Beverly swallowed hard, her chest heaving. "Gemma, please, do not do this here. Let us go outside and talk." "You did not want to talk 18 years ago at JFK Airport," I continued, taking a slow step closer to her. "You told Mrs. Montgomery I stole from you. That is a fascinating rewriting of history. Let us tell her the real story. Let us tell everyone." "Shut your mouth!" Harrison barked, finally finding his voice. He puffed out his chest, stepping in front of Beverly in a pathetic display of dominance. "You have no business crashing a private event. You are nothing but a bitter, jealous failure trying to ruin your sister's big night because you have nothing of your own." I tilted my head, studying Harrison. His tuxedo was stretched tight over his stomach and beads of sweat were forming on his forehead. Failure is an interesting word choice, Harrison, I replied smoothly. Let us talk about failure and theft. It is truly astonishing that Beverly is standing here playing the victim, especially considering she stole $600,000 in child support from that exact same ruined daughter for 10 straight years. The ballroom went dead silent. The string quartet in the corner abruptly stopped playing. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and lethal. Eleanor Montgomery gasped softly, her eyes darting to Beverly. Child support? Eleanor asked, her voice sharp with sudden suspicion. Beverly, what is she talking about? Beverly shook her head frantically, her hands fluttering in the air. She is lying. Eleanor, I swear to you, she is completely insane. She is making this up to humiliate me. She has always been a pathological liar. I reached into the inner pocket of my suit jacket and pulled out a crisp, folded legal document. I held it up between two fingers. This is a certified bank ledger from my biological father, Donovan, I announced, ensuring my voice carried across the silent room. $5,000 a month every single month for 10 years. Deposited directly into an account solely controlled by Beverly. An account she used to buy luxury cars, country club memberships, and designer clothes for Kelsey, while forcing me to wear thrift store hand-me-downs. You did not cry for months when I left Beverly. You handed me a $200 bill at Terminal 4, told me to figure it out, and then boarded a first-class flight to the Maldives with your new husband. Lies, Harrison shouted, his face turning a deep, dangerous shade of purple. He lunged forward, pointing a thick, shaking finger inches from my face. You are a sick, twisted woman. You forged those papers. You are just a pathetic caterer who snuck in through the service door. Security. Get security in here right now. I want this trash thrown out into the street. Harrison reached out, attempting to grab my arm to physically drag me away from the table. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I stood my ground, staring him down with absolute freezing contempt. Touch me, Harrison, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous register, and you will lose that hand before you can blink. He hesitated, his hand hovering in the air. The absolute certainty in my eyes made him freeze. Kelsey began to cry, loud, dramatic sobs, meant to draw sympathy from the onlookers. She buried her face in her hands, wailing about how her special night was being ruined by her crazy sister. Beverly turned to Eleanor, reaching out to grasp the older woman's arm. Eleanor, please, you have to believe me. This girl is dangerous. She is just a nobody trying to extort us. Eleanor Montgomery stepped back firmly, removing her arm from Beverly's grasp. She looked at Beverly with a mixture of disgust and extreme caution. If there is even a fraction of truth to what this young woman is saying, Beverly, the Sterling family will have absolutely nothing to do with you. We do not associate with thieves. Harrison completely lost whatever shred of sanity he had left. He waved his arms wildly at the club staff standing frozen near the walls. Where is the manager? Harrison roared, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. I demand that this woman be arrested. She is a caterer. She works here. Get her out. Before anyone could move, the heavy double doors at the back of the grand ballroom swung open with a resounding crash. A tall, impeccably dressed older man strode into the room, accompanied by 3 personal aides in sharp suits. It was Richard Montgomery, the billionaire patriarch of the groom's family, and the man whose approval Harrison desperately needed to save his failing company. Harrison's aggressive posture melted instantly. He dropped his hand and quickly wiped the sweat from his forehead. He plastered on a wide, eager smile and stepped forward to greet the patriarch, ready to explain away the scene and assert his dominance. Richard, my friend, Harrison said smoothly, extending his hand. I apologize for the commotion. We had a minor security breach with the catering staff, but it is being handled. But Richard Montgomery completely ignored Harrison's outstretched hand. He did not even look at the man. He walked right past Harrison, right past a sobbing Kelsey, and right past a hyperventilating Beverly. He stopped directly in front of me. The severe lines of Richard's face broke into an expression of absolute reverence. He reached out with both hands, grasping my right hand firmly. Chairman Gemma Richard Montgomery said, his voice booming with genuine excitement and deep respect. "I cannot believe you actually graced this minor family gathering with your presence. When my team told me the CEO of Vanguard Logistics was in the building, I thought they were joking. We have been trying to secure a meeting with your office for 6 months." I looked at Richard Montgomery, allowing a polite, measured smile to touch my features. I accepted his handshake, my grip firm and professional. "It is a pleasure to finally meet you in person, Richard," I said evenly. "My acquisitions team has been reviewing the supply chain restructuring proposals your board submitted. I instructed Liam to schedule a formal sit-down for next Tuesday." Richard beamed, clapping his other hand over ours. "Tuesday is absolutely perfect, Chairman. I will clear my entire schedule. This is a game changer for Montgomery Enterprises." Harrison stood frozen with his hands still awkwardly suspended in the air. His mouth opened and closed repeatedly, making him look like a suffocating fish. Beverly swayed on her expensive heels, her manicured fingers gripping the edge of the marble cocktail table so hard her knuckles turned white. The reality that the runaway daughter she had just viciously insulted was actually the billionaire CEO holding the keys to the Montgomery family empire was short-circuiting her brain. But Kelsey simply could not tolerate the shift in attention. This was her engagement party. She was supposed to be the undisputed star of the evening. The sight of the Montgomery patriarch fawning over the sister she despised pushed her fragile ego over the edge. "Mr. Montgomery?" Kelsey interrupted, forcing a high, breathy laugh that sounded completely unhinged in the quiet ballroom. "There has to be a huge misunderstanding here. Gemma does not run a logistics company. She is just a freelancer. She does random online gig work. She is completely making this up to embarrass me." Richard dropped my hand and turned to stare at Kelsey. His expression shifted from jovial respect to cold bewilderment. "Excuse me, young lady." Kelsey stepped forward, tossing her perfect blonde hair over her shoulder. She puffed out her chest desperately, trying to project an air of sophisticated authority. "I am just saying she does not know the first thing about real business. If you want to talk about corporate ventures, you should be talking to me. I am officially stepping into the corporate world next month. I am launching my own exclusive luxury cosmetics brand." Kelsey paused, casting a smug, triumphant look in my direction. She clearly thought this was her checkmate moment. "Dad has an incredible private investment fund, and he is fully backing my entire company. We are going to be a global brand within a year. You really should not waste your time listening to a bitter freelancer trying to play pretend." Eleanor Montgomery slowly lowered her wineglass. Her eyes darted from Kelsey to me, and then to Harrison. An uncomfortable silence blanketed our circle. I did not get angry. I did not raise my voice. I simply lifted my crystal glass and slowly swirled the champagne, watching the golden liquid catch the light of the chandeliers. "An investment fund." "Kelsey," I asked, letting a light, quiet chuckle escape my lips. "Is that what Harrison is calling it at the dinner table these days?" Kelsey crossed her arms, jutting her chin out aggressively. "Yes, a multi-million-dollar private equity fund. Not that you would understand how high-level finance works." I took a slow sip of my champagne, savoring the crisp taste before setting the glass back down on the marble table. "I understand high-level finance perfectly," I replied, my voice carrying a lethal calm. "What I do not understand is how Harrison plans to fund a global cosmetics brand using a predatory high-interest mezzanine loan." The smug satisfaction vanished from Kelsey's face. "What are you talking about?" I kept my eyes locked on Harrison. I watched the remaining blood drain from his face, leaving him looking like a walking corpse. "I am talking about the emergency capital Harrison secured exactly 14 days ago," I stated, enunciating every word with razor-sharp precision. "A loan secured by placing a second mortgage on your Beacon Hill mansion. A property that, as of yesterday morning, my corporate risk assessment team flagged on a national registry because the bank placed it under a level 4 bad debt warning." Kelsey spun around to face her stepfather. "Dad, what is she talking about? Tell them she is lying." Harrison was sweating so profusely that moisture dripped from his chin onto his stiff white collar. He wiped his face frantically with the back of his hand. "She is crazy," he sputtered, his voice cracking into a high-pitched squeak. "Eleanor Richard, I swear to you, do not listen to a single word this absolute lunatic says. She is a jealous, vindictive liar. Our finances are perfectly robust." But his panicked, erratic body language completely betrayed him. He looked like a cornered animal desperately searching for an exit. I did not let him breathe. A Level 4 warning means foreclosure proceedings initiate in exactly 10 business days. Harrison first continued my tone completely conversational, as if I were discussing the weather. "It means the bank is actively preparing to seize the property, freeze your remaining domestic assets, and liquidate the estate to recover their capital. There is no private equity fund. There is only a desperate man trying to borrow his way out of a sinking ship." Beverly let out a sharp gasp, pressing both hands against her mouth. She looked at her husband with wide, terrified eyes. "Harrison," she whispered, her voice trembling, "tell me she is making this up. Tell me the house is safe." Harrison could not look at his wife. He stared at the marble floor, his chest heaving as he struggled to draw air into his lungs. Richard Montgomery took a deliberate step back, physically distancing himself from Harrison. The warmth and respect he had shown me moments prior was completely absent when he looked at the groom's family. His jaw tightened, and a dangerous, calculating light entered his eyes. Eleanor Montgomery stepped up beside her husband. The severe matriarch looked from the sweating, panicked Harrison to the sobbing Kelsey, and finally to the horrified Beverly. Eleanor's expression hardened into a mask of pure, unadulterated disgust. "A Level 4 bad debt warning," Eleanor repeated, her voice dripping with venom. "You sat in my home, drank my wine, and boasted about your family legacy while you are weeks away from public bankruptcy and asset seizure." "Eleanor, please," Beverly begged, reaching out a trembling hand. "You must understand, business has fluctuations. We are just experiencing a temporary cash flow issue. We are still the same family." "Do not touch me," Eleanor snapped, pulling her silk shawl tighter around her shoulders. "You are frauds. You are trying to marry your daughter into my family to save yourselves from financial ruin." Kelsey grabbed Eleanor's arm, tears streaming down her face and ruining her expensive makeup. "Mrs. Montgomery, no. That is not true. I love your son. The cosmetics brand is real. We are going to be successful. Please do not let my sister ruin this for me." Eleanor yanked her arm away with surprising force. Kelsey stumbled back, nearly losing her balance on her high heels. "Your sister did not ruin anything," young Lady Eleanor said, her voice echoing with finality. "She merely turned on the lights so we could see the rats scattering." Richard Montgomery turned to his personal aide standing quietly nearby. "Call our legal team immediately," Richard ordered, his voice cold and decisive. "I want a full forensic audit of Harrison's company by morning. If they have misrepresented their financial standing on any of the prenuptial disclosures, we are terminating the engagement contract entirely." Harrison let out a pathetic groan and slumped against the cocktail table, knocking over 2 empty champagne flutes. They shattered against the marble floor, the sharp sound acting as the perfect punctuation to the destruction of his artificial empire. I stood perfectly still amid the wreckage of their social standing. I did not gloat. I did not smile. I simply adjusted the cuffs of my suit jacket and watched as the family that had thrown me away like garbage finally experienced the devastating consequences of the truth. The sound of shattering crystal finally snapped Beverly out of her paralyzed state. As Richard Montgomery turned his back and instructed his aides to audit her husband, pure survival instinct overrode Beverly's shock. She scrambled forward, her expensive heels slipping slightly on the spilled champagne. She physically blocked Richard from walking away, plastering on the brightest, most desperate society smile I had ever seen. "Richard, Eleanor, please wait," Beverly pleaded, her voice pitched unnaturally high. "You are reacting to the hysterical lies of a deeply disturbed girl. Harrison is not bankrupt. In fact, his firm is on the verge of announcing the largest acquisition in our family's history." She turned her head, projecting her voice so the surrounding guests of Manhattan's elite could hear every single word. "A $50 million commercial real estate contract. The North Bay Harbor redevelopment. It is completely guaranteed. The bridging loan on our house is simply a temporary measure for liquidity, while the final signatures are processed. We are expanding, not collapsing." Harrison snapped his head up, catching the lifeline his wife threw him. He hurriedly wiped the sweat from his forehead with a silk pocket square and straightened his shoulders. Exactly, Richard. We are partnering with Vanguard Logistics. It is a massive joint venture. Kelsey's inheritance is more than secure. We are about to double our net worth by the end of the fiscal quarter. Kelsey wiped a tear from her cheek, her face instantly transforming from despair back to sheer arrogance. She crossed her arms and glared at me. See, I told you she was lying. My parents are practically printing money. She is just a bitter freelancer trying to ruin my life because she knows she will never have a fraction of what I have. I let out a soft, genuine laugh. The sound cut effortlessly through their desperate, frantic posturing. I picked up my crystal glass from the marble table, holding it gracefully by the slender stem. I gave the champagne a slow, deliberate swirl, watching the golden liquid catch the light of the chandeliers. The North Bay project, I said, nodding slowly, as if deeply impressed. Yes, I am very familiar with that specific portfolio. I have to admit, Harrison, the business plan you sent to my office yesterday was quite touching. It read much more like a tragic fantasy novel than a legitimate financial prospectus. But whoever drafted it really should have run a basic spell check. The sheer volume of spelling errors was almost as offensive as your artificially inflated revenue projections. Harrison's eyes narrowed into tight slits. His face twisted into an ugly, dismissive sneer. His brain, so utterly poisoned by decades of his own ego, actively rejected the title Richard Montgomery had used for me just minutes earlier. He grasped desperately at the only reality his mind could process, clinging to the belief that I was still the ragged 16-year-old girl he had thrown out of his house. You saw the proposal. Harrison stammered, a mix of panic and condescension warring in his voice. Wait, you actually work at Vanguard Logistics. Beverly said you were a caterer. Are you just some lowly administrative assistant opening the mail? Did you steal a glance at my confidential files while fetching coffee for the real executives? Kelsey let out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed across the quiet ballroom. Oh my God, she is a secretary. She probably snuck in here to pretend she is important because she knows we are doing business with her bosses. How pathetic can you possibly be? Beverly crossed her arms, her confidence artificially restored by her husband's delusion. You have always been so embarrassing, Gemma. Trying to ruin our reputation just because you process paperwork for a living. Richard, surely you can see now. She is a disgruntled clerk making up lies because she is jealous of her sister's success. I took a slow sip of my champagne. The bubbles burst cool and sharp against my tongue. I lowered the glass and looked directly at Harrison. I held his gaze with absolute, unblinking intensity until the artificial confidence began to melt off his face, replaced by a creeping primal dread. I do not fetch coffee, Harrison, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly, perfectly level pitch, and I am not a lowly employee. I took a single slow step toward him. He instinctively took a step back, his heavy dress shoe crunching loudly on the broken glass he had dropped moments before. I am the one who personally reviewed your fraudulent portfolio. I continued, projecting my voice so every single wealthy investor, banker, and socialite in the ballroom could hear the absolute truth. I am the one who saw that you artificially inflated your projected asset value by 400% to cover your massive, crippling liabilities. I am the one who flagged your company to the National Registry for gross financial misrepresentation. And I am the one who took your $50 million dream and threw that piece of trash contract directly into the shredder at 8 o'clock this morning. The collective gasp from the surrounding tables was incredibly satisfying. In the periphery of my vision, I could see prominent Manhattan bankers pulling out their phones, immediately texting their risk management teams to sever all ties and call in all debts from Harrison's firm. Harrison's mouth hung open. The angry red flush on his face vanished, replaced by a sickly pallid gray. He looked exactly like a man who had just been told his parachute was empty halfway through a skydive. You rejected it, he whispered, his voice entirely devoid of air. I rejected it. I banned your firm from ever submitting a proposal to Vanguard again, and I forwarded your doctored financial statements to the Federal Regulatory Board, I replied smoothly, my tone completely devoid of mercy. Your company is not just bankrupt, Harrison. By next Friday, you will be under federal investigation for fraud. Beverly let out a high, thin wail that sounded like a dying animal. She grabbed Harrison's tuxedo lapels, shaking him violently. "Tell me she is lying. Harrison, do something. Tell them she is just a secretary. Tell them we are getting the money." But Harrison could not speak. He was trembling so violently that the ice in a nearby cocktail shaker rattled against the metal. His eyes were wide, glassy, and completely vacant as the reality of his total destruction set in. Eleanor Montgomery turned to her son Travis, who had been standing silently in the background, looking utterly horrified by the family he had almost married into. "Travis," Eleanor said, her voice cracking like a whip through the heavy silence. "Go to the coat check. We are leaving immediately. This engagement is officially terminated." Kelsey screamed. It was a raw, piercing sound of absolute entitlement being denied for the very first time in her life. She lunged toward Eleanor, tears pouring down her cheeks and leaving dark streaks of ruined mascara. "No. You cannot do this," Kelsey wailed, grasping at the air. "I am supposed to be a Montgomery. I am the golden child. We have an investment fund. She is the failure. Look at her." Kelsey pointed a shaking, manicured finger directly at my chest. "She is nothing." Richard Montgomery stepped firmly between Kelsey and his wife, acting as an immovable physical shield. He looked down at Kelsey with an expression of pure, unadulterated pity. "She is the sole owner and chairman of a $40 billion logistics and real estate empire." Young Lady Richard stated, his voice carrying the heavy, crushing weight of absolute fact. "And you are the daughter of a criminal fraud. Do not ever approach my family again." Richard turned on his heel, offering Eleanor his arm. She took it, her posture rigid with aristocratic disdain. Travis, the groom, who was supposed to anchor Kelsey to Manhattan royalty, did not even spare a backward glance at his weeping fiancée. The Montgomery family exited the grand ballroom, parting the sea of silent, staring guests, like royalty leaving a tainted room. The moment the heavy mahogany doors clicked shut behind them, the illusion holding Beverly together shattered completely. She watched her golden ticket vanish and the absolute reality of her impending poverty crash down on her. But Beverly was incapable of self-reflection. In her mind, she was never the architect of her own destruction. She needed a scapegoat, and her eyes locked onto me with a deranged feral intensity. "You ruined it," Beverly hissed, her voice vibrating with a terrifying, unhinged frequency. "You ruined my life again. You always were a curse on this family." She lunged forward, her hands curled into claws, looking as though she genuinely intended to scratch my eyes out. I stood perfectly still, my expression carved from ice. I did not need to raise my hands to defend myself. The sheer force of my unblinking stare made her falter a few feet away. She spun around, her eyes wildly scanning the edges of the ballroom. She spotted Mr. Dalton, the general manager, who was hovering near the velvet ropes, looking absolutely nauseated. Manager Beverly screeched, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Security! I demand you call security right this second. This woman is a psychotic stalker. She is a delusional street rat who broke in here to harass my family. Throw her out. Call the police and have her arrested for trespassing." Mr. Dalton did not move. He stood frozen, his eyes darting from Beverly's red, screaming face to my perfectly calm demeanor. He pulled a white handkerchief from his pocket and dabbed at his sweating forehead. Madam Dalton stammered, his voice weak. "I cannot do that." "What do you mean you cannot do that?" Beverly shrieked, her voice echoing painfully off the limestone walls. "My husband paid $50,000 to rent this ballroom. I am the mother of the bride. I am ordering you to remove this crazy person from my sight. She is ruining our private event." Mr. Dalton swallowed hard. "Madam, you do not understand. I do not take orders from you." Beverly's face contorted into a mask of pure, ugly rage. She took a step toward the terrified manager. "I will have you fired. I will call the board of directors of this club tomorrow morning and ensure you never work in Manhattan hospitality again. Get her out of here." Before Dalton could attempt to explain exactly who held the deed to the building, a deep, resonant sound cut through the chaos. It was the sound of the grand ballroom doors swinging open once again. Beverly whipped her head around her chest, heaving a cruel smile of anticipation stretching across her face. Finally, she gasped out, assuming her demanded security forces had arrived to drag me away. But it was not a team of security guards. Two men walked through the arched doorway, stepping onto the thick carpet with synchronized, terrifying authority. The first man was older, his silver hair perfectly styled. He wore a dark charcoal bespoke suit that screamed quiet generational wealth. It was the kind of tailoring that easily cost tens of thousands of dollars, draping perfectly over his broad shoulders. He walked with the relaxed, predatory grace of a man who owned whatever room he walked into. It was Donovan, my biological father. Beside him walked a man holding a sleek black leather briefcase. He had sharp, hawkish features and wore wire-rimmed glasses. Anyone in the New York financial district would recognize him instantly. It was Jonathan Caldwell, the senior managing partner of the most ruthless, aggressive corporate litigation firm on the Eastern Seaboard. He was a legal shark, a man who dismantled corporate empires before breakfast. The wealthy guests surrounding us began to aggressively whisper. The presence of Jonathan Caldwell at a social event meant blood was in the water. Beverly stared at the two men, her brain struggling to process the visual information. She had not seen Donovan in 18 years. The last time she saw him, she had convinced herself he was a destitute loser who could not afford to buy me a winter coat. Donovan. Beverly choked out her voice, a mixture of absolute confusion and rising panic. "What are you doing here? How did you get in here?" She looked at his suit, taking in the gleam of his platinum cufflinks and the undeniable aura of supreme power rolling off him. But her toxic ego refused to accept the evidence right in front of her eyes. She fell back on her oldest habit, belittling him. "Did you follow her here?" Beverly spat, waving a dismissive hand toward me. "Is this some kind of pathetic family reunion? Did you rent that suit to try and impress my guests? You are just as much of a failure as she is. Get out of my party before I have you both thrown in a holding cell." Donovan did not even glance at her. He treated Beverly with the exact same level of attention one might give a buzzing gnat. He walked directly toward me, the sea of Manhattan elites parting for him without a single word spoken. He stopped at my side, turning to face the ruined, trembling remnants of the Sterling family. He reached out and placed a firm, warm hand on my shoulder. It was a gesture of absolute, unshakable pride. "You handled the corporate trash beautifully," Chairman Donovan said to me, his deep voice carrying clearly over the dead silence of the ballroom. "I thought I would come handle the domestic disposal." Harrison, who had been staring at the marble floor in a catatonic state of shock since I shredded his financial future, finally lifted his head. His eyes locked onto Caldwell's sleek briefcase, and a fresh wave of sweat erupted on his face. He knew exactly who the lawyer was. Donovan turned his gaze to the lawyer standing at his left. He did not raise his voice. He spoke with the quiet, devastating calm of a king addressing his court. Lawyer Caldwell Donovan commanded, his tone dripping with lethal authority. "Explain to these uninvited guests who actually has the right to kick people out here." Jonathan Caldwell stepped forward, snapping the brass latches of his briefcase open with two sharp clicks. He did not smile. He pulled a thick stack of legal documents printed on heavy watermarked paper. "Mrs. Sterling." Mr. Sterling Caldwell began, his voice clinical, cold, and loud enough for the entire room to hear. "As of 48 hours ago, the deed, the operating licenses, and the entirety of the Pinnacle Club's assets were acquired by Vanguard Logistics." Caldwell adjusted his glasses, looking directly at Beverly's pale, horrified face. "My client, Chairman Gemma, is the sole proprietor of this establishment. You are currently standing in her living room." Beverly's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked at me, then at Donovan, her mind fracturing under the weight of the reality she had spent a lifetime running from. Furthermore, Caldwell continued, pulling a specific document from the stack. "Upon auditing the club's membership ledger this afternoon, we discovered that your family's membership dues are currently 90 days in arrears. In accordance with the club's bylaws, which my client now enforces, your membership has been permanently revoked." Harrison let out a weak, pathetic wheeze. He grabbed the edge of the cocktail table to keep his knees from buckling. "You are not renting this ballroom," Mr. Sterling Caldwell stated, holding up a voided contract. "Because the check you provided for the deposit bounced at 3 o'clock yesterday afternoon. You have no legal right to occupy this space. You have no right to consume the catering. You are by all legal definitions trespassing on private commercial property." Kelsey let out a piercing shriek. She stomped her foot on the floor, pointing at me. "This is illegal. You cannot do this. You are just doing this to be mean. We are family." I finally stepped forward, moving out from under my father's protective hand. I looked at my younger half-sister, feeling absolutely nothing but cold indifference. "We are not family, Kelsey," I replied, my voice echoing like ice cracking. "We never were. You made that perfectly clear when I was 16. I am simply a landlord removing a group of squatters who cannot pay their bills." I turned my attention back to the general manager, who was still standing at attention near the velvet ropes. "Mr. Dalton," I called out. "Yes," Chairman Gemma Dalton responded immediately, standing up military straight. I gestured casually toward Harrison, Beverly, and Kelsey. "These three individuals are trespassing. Have security escort them out through the service elevator at the back. Ensure they use the alleyway next to the dumpsters. They are not permitted to exit through the main lobby. Their attire is disturbing my legitimate guests." Mr. Dalton nodded frantically, his face pale with relief now that the true hierarchy was established. He gestured to the burly security guards lingering near the entrance. Before the guards could even take a step forward, Jonathan Caldwell stepped up to the edge of our circle. He did not simply hand over the paperwork. He raised the thick stack of financial records and brought them down flat against the marble cocktail table with a deafening crack. The sound echoed like a gunshot through the silent ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen," Caldwell announced, his voice vibrating with absolute legal authority. "This establishment, the Pinnacle Club, is entirely owned by Vanguard Logistics, chaired by Ms. Gemma. Furthermore, my audit of the ledger reveals that Mr. Harrison and Mrs. Beverly Sterling are not merely trespassing. They are currently 3 months delinquent on their membership dues. Worse still, the card held on file to secure tonight's exorbitant catering bill is a fraudulent line of credit opened under a fictitious corporate entity." A collective gasp rippled through the surrounding crowd of Manhattan elites. Eleanor Montgomery, who had been standing mere inches from my mother, reacted with violent immediacy. Beverly had instinctively reached out her trembling fingers, brushing against Eleanor's silk sleeve, in a desperate, silent plea for solidarity. Eleanor yanked her arm back so forcefully she nearly knocked over a passing waiter. She stared at Beverly's hand as if she had just been grazed by a leper. "Do not ever touch me with those thieving hands," Eleanor hissed, her voice dripping with aristocratic revulsion. "You are common grifters playing dress-up. To think I almost allowed my son to tie his name to this absolute circus of poverty and fraud." It turns my stomach. Beverly physically recoiled, wrapping her arms around her own stomach as if she had been stabbed. The society matron she had spent months trying to impress had just publicly branded her a criminal. Harrison's chest heaved. The vein in his neck pulsed erratically. He looked at Caldwell, then at the thick stack of papers proving his financial crimes. "That is a lie," Harrison sputtered, his voice cracking under the intense scrutiny of the entire room. "That credit card is tied to a legitimate offshore holding company. You cannot prove a thing. We belong here. We are the guests of honor." Caldwell did not even blink. He slid a single sheet of paper from the top of the stack and pushed it across the marble surface. "A holding company registered to a vacant lot in Delaware, which defaulted yesterday morning," Caldwell corrected smoothly. "We have already handed the entire paper trail over to the district attorney. You will be served with a subpoena regarding wire fraud before the end of the week." Donovan stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with me. He looked at the sweating, crumbling man who had raised me with nothing but contempt. "You spent a decade telling this brilliant young woman she was worthless," Donovan said, his tone lethally calm. "You dressed her in rags while you bought luxury cars on stolen credit. You treated her like an unwanted burden while draining the child support I sent to feed her. And now you stand in a building she owns drinking champagne she paid for, about to face federal prison. The irony is almost poetic." Kelsey let out a guttural sob. The walls of her perfect, entitled reality were collapsing and she refused to be caught in the rubble. She spun around her tear-streaked face, turning to the only person she thought could save her. She lunged past Richard Montgomery and grabbed the arm of her former fiancé. "Travis, please!" Kelsey begged, her voice high and desperate. "You know me. You know I have nothing to do with their money. We love each other. We can still get married. We can just leave them behind. I will disown them right now." Travis Montgomery looked at Kelsey with an expression of profound emptiness. He did not look angry. He looked entirely exhausted by her mere presence. He gently but firmly pried her manicured fingers off his tailored jacket. "You lied to me about everything, Kelsey," Travis said quietly, but the words carried clearly in the breathless silence of the ballroom. "You lied about your education, your family's status, and clearly your basic sense of morality. You were perfectly happy to let your sister be treated like garbage as long as it kept you in designer clothes. I'm not marrying a liability. My mother is right. This is completely over." Kelsey staggered backward, a fresh wave of tears destroying her perfectly contoured face. She fell against Harrison, weeping uncontrollably. 4 security guards in dark suits formed a tight perimeter around the Sterling family. Mr. Dalton stepped forward, pointing toward the heavy brass doors leading to the kitchen corridors. "Right this way, please." Dalton ordered, his voice finally steady and authoritative. "Do not make us use physical force. Your coats will be brought down to the alleyway." Beverly snapped. The realization that she was losing her wealthy son-in-law, her social standing, and her freedom all in the span of 5 minutes completely broke her fragile mind. She lunged forward again, ignoring the massive security guards blocking her path. Her eyes locked onto me with pure, unadulterated venom. "You planned this from the start!" Beverly screamed, her voice tearing through her throat as 2 guards seized her tightly by the arms. "You wicked, ungrateful wretch! You think you have won because you have money. You think you hold all the cards just because you wear a nice suit." She thrashed against the guards, digging her expensive heels into the thick carpet, refusing to be dragged away quietly. I watched her struggle, feeling nothing but a profound sense of closure. "You do not know half of what we did, Gemma." Beverly shrieked, a manic, desperate smile stretching across her face as she played her absolute last pathetic hand. "If Harrison goes down for fraud, I am taking your precious biological father down with us. I kept the original documents from the trust fund. I know exactly what Donovan did to your mother's estate before she died." The room fell dead silent once again. The security guards hesitated, glancing toward me for confirmation to proceed. Donovan stiffened beside me, the muscles in his jaw ticking. I looked at Beverly, analyzing this new desperate hand she was trying to play, ready to call her final bluff. I looked at Beverly, analyzing her desperate, wide eyes. She was a drowning woman trying to drag anyone she could down into the dark water with her. She genuinely believed that throwing out a vague threat about decades-old trust documents would somehow force a billionaire CEO to back down. Donovan let out a short, harsh bark of a laugh. He did not look intimidated. He looked immensely entertained. "You mean the forged documents you created with that disbarred notary in New Jersey?" Beverly, Donovan asked, his voice dripping with absolute amusement. "The ones you tried to use to extort me 12 years ago, I handed those over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation last month. They were very interested in learning exactly how you funded your current lifestyle. Your little blackmail folder is currently sitting in an evidence locker." Beverly froze. The manic energy fueling her blackmail threat evaporated instantly, leaving her looking utterly hollow. The last weapon in her arsenal had just turned to ash in her hands. Then something truly repulsive happened. I watched the gears turning in her head as she processed her total defeat. She looked at Caldwell. She looked at the heavy gold watch on my wrist, and she looked at the sheer, undeniable reality of my $40 billion net worth. The venom completely vanished from her face. In the blink of an eye, the snarling, vicious woman was replaced by a weeping, trembling, devoted mother. It was a psychotic, seamless transition that only a true narcissist could execute. She broke free from the security guards, who were too stunned by the emotional whiplash to hold her tight. She threw herself onto the floor at my feet, grabbing my hands with her perfectly manicured fingers. Gemma, my sweet Gemma. Beverly sobbed, tears ruining her expensive foundation as she looked up at me. You have to understand. I had to do it. I knew you had a brilliant mind. I knew you were destined for greatness. I kicked you out because I wanted you to be independent. The crowd of onlookers recoiled. Several prominent Manhattan socialites actually muttered aloud in disgust, shielding their faces behind their champagne flutes. If I had let you stay in our house, you would have become spoiled and lazy like everyone else, Beverly cried, tightening her grip on my hands, her tear-stained face projecting manufactured adoration. I gave you the greatest gift a mother could give her child. I gave you the drive to succeed. Look at you now. A billionaire. My beautiful, powerful daughter. You are my greatest achievement. She was genuinely trying to rewrite a decade of abuse, neglect, and theft into an act of maternal sacrifice. The sheer breathtaking shamelessness of it made my skin crawl. We are family. Gemma Beverly pleaded, her voice taking on a sickly, sweet, wheedling tone that made my stomach churn. We share the same blood. You owe your success to the tough love I gave you. And right now, your family is in a little bit of trouble. She forced a watery, hopeful smile, batting her tear-soaked eyelashes. Harrison just needs a tiny bridge loan. Just $20 million to keep the creditors away until we restructure. $20 million is nothing to you now, sweetheart. It is just pocket change. You could toss it to us and save our entire family legacy. Please, Gemma, do it for your mother. I looked down at the woman kneeling on the marble floor. I did not feel anger. I did not feel pity. I felt the exact kind of revulsion one experiences when stepping in something rotting on the sidewalk. I methodically, slowly pulled my hands out of her desperate grasp. I turned my head slightly to the side. Mr. Dalton, I said quietly. The general manager immediately stepped forward, pulling a pristine folded linen napkin from his breast pocket. He placed it directly into my outstretched hand, bowing his head respectfully. I kept my eyes locked on Beverly as I began to wipe my hands. I scrubbed my fingers and my palms, meticulously cleaning the places where her skin had touched mine. I took my time, ensuring every single guest in the ballroom understood exactly how unclean she made me feel. When I was finished, I dropped the crumpled linen napkin directly onto the floor beside her knees. My pocket change is used to buy premium dog food, Beverly, I said, my voice carrying the freezing absolute weight of a finalized verdict. I do not use my money to feed parasites. Beverly collapsed backward, her mouth hanging open in a silent scream of absolute shock. The brutal, unvarnished rejection hit her harder than any physical blow ever could. She scrambled backward on the floor, crab, walking away from me as if I had just set her on fire. Harrison let out a pathetic whimper, burying his face in his hands as the last shred of his dignity evaporated. Kelsey was curled into a tight ball near the cocktail table, sobbing so hard she was hyperventilating, her designer dress pooling around her like a deflated parachute. Take out the trash, Donovan commanded, gesturing sharply to the security team. The guards moved in without hesitation. They hoisted Beverly up by her arms, ignoring her sudden, thrashing shrieks. Two more grabbed Harrison, dragging his dead weight across the beautiful carpet. Another took Kelsey by the elbow, pulling the weeping bride to be away from the ruins of her fabricated fairy tale. As they were being dragged backward toward the service doors, Harrison managed to lift his heavy head. His face was purple with rage and absolute humiliation. "You will regret this!" Harrison screamed, his voice cracking wildly, echoing off the high ceilings. "I will liquidate everything. I will sell the house. I will sell the cars. I will take my cash and start over. You will never see us again, but we will survive. We are Sterlings." I stepped forward, raising my voice just enough to ensure it carried over his pathetic, flailing shouts. "About your liquidation plan." Harrison, I called out, watching his frantic eyes lock onto mine from across the room. "You should check the details of that bad debt warning again. The bank did not just flag your assets. They sold your defaulted debt to a third-party collection firm this afternoon." Harrison stopped, struggling against the guards, what he wheezed, his eyes bulging. I offered him a final razor-sharp smile. "Did you really think Vanguard Logistics only deals in supply chains?" I asked softly. knowing the acoustics of the silent ballroom would carry my words directly to him. I bought your debt, Harrison. I own your mortgage. I own your cars. I own the shoes on your feet. And tomorrow morning I am changing the locks on the Beacon Hill mansion. Harrison's knees finally gave out entirely. He collapsed onto the polished marble floor, the sharp shards of the broken champagne flutes biting into the expensive fabric of his trousers. He did not even seem to feel the glass. He simply stared at my designer shoes, his mouth opening and closing in a silent, suffocating panic. The sheer magnitude of his absolute ruin had short-circuited his brain. He was no longer a proud, arrogant titan of industry. He was a hollow shell of a man who had gambled his entire life on a fraudulent facade and lost everything. Beverly was completely paralyzed, pinned between the iron grips of the two security guards. The manic energy that had fueled her for the last 10 minutes vanished. Her eyes were wide, glassy, and fixed on the space just past my shoulder. She was mentally trapped in a nightmare from which she could not wake up. But Kelsey was entirely different. Her fiancé had walked out the door without a second glance. Her future mother-in-law had publicly discarded her like toxic waste. The glittering high society life she had been promised was burning to the ground right in front of her eyes. Instead of feeling shame or remorse, Kelsey's toxic entitlement violently rejected the reality of her situation. If she was going down, she was going to claw at anything she could reach. Her eyes darted around the ballroom, frantically searching for a weapon. She spotted Mr. Dalton, the general manager, who was currently holding a thick black leather folio. It was the final invoice for the evening's lavish engagement party. Kelsey wrenched her arm free from the security guard who was lightly holding her elbow. She stomped over to the general manager, her heels clicking aggressively against the floor, and snatched the leather folio right out of his hands. She spun around and marched directly back to me, thrusting the leather folder aggressively into my personal space. "You want to play the big, powerful billionaire Gemma Kelsey?" shrieked her voice, echoing shrilly in the vast, silent ballroom. "You want to walk in here and act like you own the world? Fine, prove it." I glanced down at the black leather folio. I did not reach for it. "What is this, Kelsey?" I asked, my tone completely flat and unaffected by her hysterical display. "It is the bill for tonight," Kelsey sneered, her tear-streaked face twisting into a mask of pure, petty vindictiveness. $120,000. Custom floral arrangements, vintage champagne, imported caviar, and a live string quartet. "You completely ruined my engagement party. You humiliated me in front of the Montgomery family. You owe me this. If you are really worth $40 billion, pay the damn bill. If you do not, my future in-laws will know you are just a cheap, stingy fraud." Beverly suddenly snapped out of her catatonic state. Her survival instincts kicked in once again. She knew perfectly well that the credit card Harrison had placed on file to secure this party was completely fraudulent. If the club attempted to run that card at the end of the night, the police would be called immediately. They would not just be evicted, they would be arrested for grand larceny before they even reached the sidewalk. "Yes," Beverly chimed in, her voice trembling, but laced with a desperate, goading edge. "You owe us that much, Gemma. You crashed a private family event and caused an unbelievable scene. The least you can do to compensate for your atrocious behavior is cover the catering invoice. If you do not pay it, every single wealthy guest left in this room will know exactly how incredibly stingy you truly are. You talk a big game about wealth, but let us see if you actually have any real money." I looked at my mother and my half-sister. They were standing in the smoldering wreckage of their entirely fabricated lives, seconds away from federal investigations and total bankruptcy, yet they were still trying to manipulate me into paying for their extravagant vanity project. It was a spectacular display of bottomless greed. Mr. Dalton stepped forward, his face pale with deep embarrassment. "Chairman Gemma, I sincerely apologize for this display," Dalton said, quickly reaching out to take the folio from Kelsey. "You absolutely do not have to entertain this nonsense. I will have them removed from the premises immediately and contact the local authorities regarding the fraudulent credit card on file." I held up a single manicured hand, stopping the general manager in his tracks. "It is quite all right, Mr. Dalton," I said smoothly. I never leave a debt unpaid. I reached into the inner breast pocket of my tailored suit jacket. My fingers bypassed the business cards and the platinum pen, finding the heavy cold metal edge I was looking for. I withdrew my hand and held up an American Express Centurion card. The black titanium caught the light of the chandeliers, projecting an undeniable aura of absolute limitless financial power. Kelsey's eyes locked onto the black card. For a fraction of a second, raw, naked envy flashed across her features. She had spent her entire adult life chasing men who might one day qualify for a card like that, and her despised older sister was casually holding one between two fingers. But that envy was quickly swallowed by a wave of smug, arrogant satisfaction. Kelsey crossed her arms and shot a triumphant look at her mother. Beverly mirrored the expression, letting out a sharp, breathless sigh of relief. In their profoundly twisted minds, they had just won a major victory. They genuinely believed they had successfully manipulated the situation, forcing the billionaire CEO into paying for their lavish party through petty social pressure. They thought they had backed me into a corner. Mr. Dalton pulled a sleek wireless point-of-sale terminal from his jacket pocket. He held it out with trembling hands. I tapped the heavy titanium card against the digital screen. The machine processed the transaction instantly. A sharp, clear beep echoed in the quiet space, signaling the successful transfer of $120,000. The machine whirred to life, printing a long white receipt detailing the staggering cost of the Sterling family's vanity. I took the receipt from Mr. Dalton. I did not even look at the numbers. I simply folded the paper neatly in half. "Thank you so much, Gemma," Kelsey said, her tone dripping with mock sweetness and overwhelming arrogance. "I suppose your little stunt tonight was worth the price of admission. It is nice to know you are good for something other than ruining my life." Beverly actually smiled a genuine, relieved smile. She adjusted her silk shawl, lifting her chin with restored artificial dignity. "Well," Harrison Beverly said, looking down at her collapsed husband. "Get up. The bill is settled. Let us leave this dreadful place. We have packing to do before tomorrow morning." I stood perfectly still. I slipped the heavy black card back into my tailored jacket pocket. I looked at the two women gloating in front of me, savoring their microscopic, entirely imaginary victory. I turned my head slightly, catching the eye of Jonathan Caldwell. The ruthless corporate litigator stood like a coiled spring, his hands resting on the brass latches of his open briefcase, waiting for my absolute command. Donovan stood beside him, a dark, knowing smirk playing on his lips as he watched me operate. I turned my gaze back to Beverly and Kelsey. The icy calm in my eyes instantly extinguished their triumphant smiles. "My part is paid in full," I said, my voice dropping to a low, lethal whisper that sent a visible shiver down Kelsey's spine. I smoothly handed the folded white receipt to Mr. Dalton. Then I nodded directly at Caldwell. Now I stated the finality of my words, locking the trap completely shut around them. "It is time to settle your tab." Caldwell adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses with clinical precision. He turned toward the general manager, who was still clutching the folded receipt of my petty cash expenditure. "Mr. Dalton Caldwell," said his voice slicing through the heavy silence of the ballroom. "I believe this facility is equipped with a high-definition projection system for corporate events. Lower the main screen on the stage and dim the central chandeliers." Dalton did not hesitate. He gestured frantically to a technician lingering near the soundboard. Within seconds, the magnificent crystal chandeliers hanging above us dimmed to a low, dramatic amber. A mechanical hum filled the air as a massive theater-sized projection screen descended from the gilded ceiling at the far end of the ballroom. Harrison's head snapped up. The remaining color drained entirely from his face, leaving him the shade of old parchment. He scrambled against the grip of the security guards, his expensive shoes slipping uselessly on the marble floor. "No, Harrison," gasped his voice, a ragged, terrified wheeze. "You cannot do this. This is a private event. You have no right to display my personal information. I will sue you. I will sue Vanguard Logistics into the ground." Caldwell ignored him completely. He reached into his briefcase and extracted a small, sleek silver flash drive. He handed it to one of his legal assistants, who immediately strode over to the AV booth. "You cannot sue anyone, Mr. Sterling." Caldwell replied, his tone devoid of any human empathy. You do not even have the funds to hire a paralegal, let alone mount a corporate lawsuit against a multinational conglomerate. And as for privacy, the documents we are about to review are part of the public record heavily featured in current federal indictments and explicitly tied to the acquisition executed by my client. The giant screen flickered to life. The brilliant white light illuminated the shocked, captivated faces of the Manhattan elite surrounding us. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Projected on the massive screen was a staggering, complex web of financial flowcharts, bank statements heavily redacted in red ink, and corporate registration documents. At the very top, in bold black letters, was the name of Harrison's flagship investment firm. Beneath it, a sprawling, chaotic hierarchy of shell companies' offshore accounts and staggering negative balances painted a picture of absolute, unmitigated ruin. Ladies and gentlemen, Caldwell projected his voice so every single person in the room could hear the execution of the Sterling Empire. What you are looking at is not a successful venture capital firm. You are looking at an empty shell, a spectacularly poorly managed Ponzi scheme that has been running on fumes and fraudulent loans for the better part of 5 years. Beverly let out a strangled cry. She covered her eyes with her hands, unable to look at the massive screen, broadcasting her profound poverty to the very society women she had spent decades trying to impress. Eleanor Montgomery stood near the front of the crowd, her lips curled in a sneer of absolute disgust as she read the numbers. Let us direct our attention to the primary operating account. Caldwell continued using a laser pointer to circle a heavily outlined box in the center of the screen. Mr. Sterling has spent the evening boasting about his recent acquisitions. The truth is, his primary company has generated zero legitimate revenue in 36 months. To fund his wife's shopping habits, his stepdaughter's designer wardrobe, and the lease on their Beacon Hill mansion, Mr. Sterling has been engaging in massive systemic wire fraud. Harrison stopped fighting the guards. He hung limply between them, staring at the screen as if watching his own execution. He has leveraged properties he does not own. Caldwell stated, his voice ringing like a judge reading a death sentence. He has forged signatures on collateral documents. He has drained the pension funds of his own mid-level employees. The holding company he claimed was backing this extravagant party defaulted yesterday because the federal government froze the accounts pending a criminal investigation. Murmurs of outrage erupted from the crowd. Several men in expensive tuxedos pulled out their phones, frantically dialing their own wealth managers to ensure their funds were not somehow tangled in Harrison's toxic web. "This is a setup," Kelsey shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at the screen. "You fabricated all of this. My father is a genius. We are rich. We are the Sterlings. You are just jealous." Caldwell did not even grant her a glance. He tapped a button on a remote control in his hand. The screen transitioned to a new document. It was a staggering ledger of outstanding debt, high-interest bridge loans, and defaulted mortgages. The total number at the bottom of the column was highlighted in bright, glaring red. It was a sum so astronomically high it made the crowd fall completely silent. As of this week, Mr. Sterling's liabilities exceeded his fictitious assets by over $80 million, Caldwell announced. He is facing imminent foreclosure, asset seizure, and a mountain of civil litigation from defrauded investors. He is, by all legal definitions, entirely bankrupt. Beverly slowly lowered her hands from her face. She stared at the red number on the screen. The reality of her situation finally breached the iron walls of her narcissism. The designer clothes, the country club memberships, the endless lunches with women who secretly despised her, it was all gone. She was going to be thrown out onto the street with absolutely nothing. But Harrison was a survivor of the gutter. He had clawed his way up once, and his rat-like instincts flared to life. He lifted his head, a twisted, desperate grin breaking through his panic. "Fine," Harrison spat, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and bravado. "Fine. The company is under. So what? I will declare Chapter 11 tomorrow morning. I will file for corporate bankruptcy. The federal courts will protect me from the creditors. I will restructure the debt, walk away clean, and leave the banks holding the bag. You think exposing me changes anything? I know how the game is played. I will tie this up in litigation for 10 years. You will never see a single dime of my actual hidden assets. I stepped forward. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with the quiet, chilling calm of a predator that had finally cornered its prey. You are entirely missing the point, Harrison, I said softly. Caldwell pressed the remote control one final time. The screen flashed to a heavily watermarked legal contract. It bore the crest of Vanguard Logistics and the official stamp of a federal bankruptcy judge. You are not dealing with a faceless consortium of banks anymore, Mr. Sterling Caldwell announced, his tone dropping an octave. As I stated earlier, Vanguard Logistics acquired the Pinnacle Club. But that was merely a fractional purchase. Vanguard Logistics specializes in distressed asset acquisition. Caldwell turned fully to face the ruined family, his eyes locking onto Harrison. All of your bad debts, Caldwell stated, articulating every single syllable with devastating clarity. The defaulted mortgages, the fraudulent bridge loans, the leveraged offshore accounts. All of them were acquired by Vanguard Logistics at dawn this morning. In other words, Miss Gemma is officially the legal creditor of this entire family. Harrison's jaw dropped. The breath was knocked entirely out of his lungs. Every single penny you owe, I said, taking a slow, deliberate step toward the man who had made my childhood a living hell. You owe directly to me. Beverly let out a horrifying, high-pitched wail. She scrambled forward on her hands and knees again, ignoring the shattered glass cutting into her palms. She threw herself toward my feet, her face contorted in a mask of absolute terror. No, Beverly screamed. No, Gemma. Please, you cannot do this. We are your family. You cannot take our home. Where will we go? We will be homeless. You have so much money. You do not need our house. Please, I am your mother. I gave birth to you. I looked down at her. She was a pathetic, groveling creature begging for mercy from the daughter she had treated like a stray dog. You threw me out into a blizzard with nothing but the clothes on my back, I reminded her, my voice echoing like cracking ice. You told me I was a curse. You told me to go starve in the gutter. You said independence was the greatest gift you could give me. I crouched down slightly, bringing my face level with hers. I am simply returning the favor, Beverly. I am giving you the exact same gift of total independence. I want you to experience the character-building joy of having absolutely nothing. Kelsey, witnessing her mother begging on the floor, completely lost her mind. She lunged forward, trying to slap me, but Donovan was faster. He stepped cleanly between us, his massive hand catching her wrist mid-air. He did not hurt her, but his grip was like an iron vice. He threw her arm back, sending her stumbling into the security guards. Do not ever attempt to touch my daughter again, Donovan growled, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that silenced the entire room. I stood back up, smoothing the lapels of my suit jacket. I looked at Caldwell, who was already packing his documents back into his sleek briefcase. Freeze all of their accounts immediately, I commanded Caldwell, not taking my eyes off the Sterling family. Seize the Beacon Hill property. Confiscate the vehicles. I want their credit cards deactivated before they even reach the sidewalk. If they attempt to access so much as a safety deposit box, have them arrested for violating the terms of the debt acquisition. Yes, Chairman Caldwell replied briskly, snapping the briefcase shut. Harrison let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. He tried to lunge at me, his face twisted in pure animalistic hatred, but the guard slammed him face first onto the marble floor, easily subduing his pathetic resistance. You cannot take everything, Harrison muffled against the stone. I can, and I already have, I replied. I turned my back on them, facing the crowd of stunned, silent guests. The elite of Manhattan parted instantly, creating a wide, clear path to the main exit. Nobody spoke. Nobody dared to intervene. They had just witnessed a masterclass in absolute financial slaughter, and they were terrified of drawing my attention. Mr. Dalton, I said, glancing over my shoulder one last time. Yes, miss, Gemma Dalton squeaked, standing at attention. Drag them out through the service elevator, I ordered, my voice carrying zero emotion, and make sure they take the trash with them. I walked out of the grand ballroom, Donovan by my side, the heavy mahogany doors clicking shut behind us, leaving the Sterling family to drown in the absolute ruin of their own making. Harrison let out a sound like a dying animal. The reality of losing the Beacon Hill mansion finally broke the last remaining thread of his sanity. He slumped against the security guards, utterly defeated, his eyes staring blankly at the marble floor. Kelsey, however, refused to accept her new reality. The human mind can only process so much trauma before it completely fractures, and Kelsey's fragile ego shattered into a million jagged pieces right there in the center of the ballroom. She wrenched herself free from the guard holding her arm. She did not run toward the exit. Instead, she scrambled wildly toward the center of the room, her eyes locked onto Travis Montgomery. "Travis, do not listen to them." Kelsey begged, her voice high, breathless, and laced with absolute hysteria. She threw her arms around his neck, pressing her tear-stained face against his expensive tuxedo. "This is just a sick trick. Gemma is just jealous of me. She has always been jealous of me. I am still your fiancé. I am still a wealthy heiress. We belong together." She shoved her left hand directly into Travis's face, forcing him to look at the massive, glittering stone on her ring finger. "Look at this ring, Travis!" Kelsey cried out, her voice echoing shrilly over the murmurs of the stunned guests. "Look at the 5-carat diamond you gave me. This is the proof of our love. This ring proves my worth. A grifter does not wear a flawless diamond. We are meant to be. We can just walk away from these losers right now and get married tomorrow. Do not let her ruin our perfect life." Travis looked at her hand. His expression caught somewhere between profound pity and absolute disgust. He reached up and grabbed her wrist, not with affection, but with the firm, clinical grip of a man trying to remove a parasite from his clothing. Before Travis could peel her manicured fingers off his jacket, Jonathan Caldwell let out a sharp, genuine laugh. It was a terrifying sound entirely devoid of any real humor. He stepped out from the shadows of the massive projection screen, walking directly toward the struggling couple. "Actually, Miss Sterling Caldwell," said, his voice dripping with lethal, calculated amusement, "I am incredibly glad you brought up that specific piece of jewelry. It saves me the trouble of addressing it myself." Caldwell opened his sleek briefcase one last time. He reached inside and pulled out a small, wrinkled piece of yellow paper. It was a stark contrast to the heavy, watermarked legal documents he had been handling all night. It looked cheap, dirty, and entirely out of place in a luxury country club. "What you are holding up as the ultimate symbol of your wealth and status is much like your entire family, a complete fabrication," Caldwell announced, turning so his voice projected to the entire room. "During our forensic audit of your father's catastrophic finances, Vanguard Logistics uncovered a rather nasty secondary habit. It seems Mr. Harrison Sterling is not just a corporate fraud. He is also a degenerate underground gambler." Harrison thrashed violently against the security guards, his eyes widening in pure, unadulterated terror. He kicked his legs out, trying to launch himself at the lawyer. "Shut up!" Harrison screamed, his face turning an unhealthy shade of crimson. "Shut your mouth! Do not say another word!" Caldwell ignored the flailing man, entirely adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he looked directly at Kelsey's horrified face. "Last month, to satisfy a violently aggressive debt to an illegal betting syndicate, your father required immediate liquid cash." Caldwell stated, his clinical tone cutting through Harrison's screams. "Since his credit was entirely ruined and all his assets were leveraged, he resorted to domestic theft. While you were enjoying a weekend spa retreat with your mother, your father took your engagement ring to a highly unethical jeweler in the Diamond District. He had the flawless 5-carat diamond pried out of the setting. He replaced it with a piece of synthetic glass, a high-grade cubic zirconia." Kelsey froze perfectly still. The breath hitched in her throat. Caldwell waved the yellow paper in the air for the crowd to see. "This is the pawn shop receipt," Caldwell said. He fenced the real diamond for a fraction of its actual market value, just to keep his bookies from breaking his legs. "You are currently waving around a piece of costume jewelry that is worth less than the catering trays in the kitchen." Kelsey slowly lowered her arm. The blood drained completely from her face, leaving her looking like a porcelain doll. She looked down at her hand, her eyes wide and manic. She stared at the massive stone she had been flaunting to her friends for months. "No," Kelsey whispered, her voice trembling so violently she could barely form the words. "No, that is a lie. Daddy would never do that to me. Daddy loves me. He bought me everything I ever wanted. He would not steal from me." She turned her desperate, pleading eyes toward Harrison, silently begging him to deny the lawyer's accusation. Harrison could not meet her gaze. He squeezed his eyes shut and turned his head away, weeping openly into the shoulder of the security guard holding him. His silence was a deafening confession. Travis Montgomery did not wait for Kelsey to process her father's ultimate betrayal. His eyes narrowed into dangerous, lethal slits. He yanked Kelsey's hand forward, gripping her fingers so tightly she let out a sharp gasp of pain. He held the ring up to the amber light of the dimmed chandeliers, inspecting the stone with a sudden, furious intensity. Without the brilliant, blinding light of the ballroom's previous setting to mask its flaws, the truth was blatantly obvious to anyone who knew luxury. The stone lacked the deep, fiery brilliance of a true, flawless diamond. It was glassy, dull, and entirely fake. The setting around the prongs was slightly warped, a clear sign of tampering. Travis dropped her hand as if her skin had physically burned him. He stepped backward, pulling a crisp white handkerchief from his pocket to wipe his fingers. "It is glass," Travis said, his voice shaking with a terrifying, absolute rage that echoed through the quiet room. "It is a fake. You let your father butcher a Montgomery family heirloom to pay off a gambling debt. You are all nothing but common thieves." Kelsey stared at her empty hand, the fake diamond feeling like a lead weight dragging her straight down into hell. The realization that she was wearing a worthless piece of glass that her own father had robbed her to save his own skin finally shattered her completely. She let out a piercing, agonizing scream and collapsed onto her knees, tearing at her hair. Eleanor Montgomery pushed her way aggressively to the front of the crowd. The society matron's face was purple with apocalyptic fury. The veil of high society manners was completely gone. She looked like a woman ready to commit murder. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger directly at Harrison's weeping face. "Police!" Eleanor screamed, her voice shattering the last remaining shred of decorum in the grand ballroom. "Call the police this instant. I want that man arrested for grand larceny. I want him in a federal cell. Lock the doors. Do not let the security guards take them outside. Nobody leaves this building until that entire family is in handcuffs." Eleanor's shrieks echoed off the vaulted ceilings, commanding the room with the authority of a woman who had never been denied. The security guards looked toward me for confirmation. I gave a single slight nod. The heavy oak doors of the ballroom were immediately secured, locking the Sterling family inside their own personal nightmare. Kelsey remained on the floor, her hands gripping the torn fabric of her dress. She let out a long, agonizing scream that tore from the very bottom of her lungs. It was the sound of a woman watching her entire fabricated reality burn to ash. She pounded her fists against the marble, weeping so violently she began to choke on her own tears. Harrison watched the Montgomery family walk away. He watched the billionaire's safety net he had been banking on vanish through the heavy oak doors. His eyes darted to his wife, broken and whimpering, and then to his daughter, screaming in the wreckage of her ruined life. The illusion of his power, his wealth, his untouchable status was utterly annihilated. He had nothing left to leverage. He had nowhere left to run. Something inside Harrison's brain snapped. The thin veneer of the sophisticated venture capitalist dissolved completely, revealing the desperate, violent street thug he had always been underneath the bespoke suits. He let out a guttural roar, a sound devoid of any human reason or restraint. He scrambled to his feet, throwing his weight against one of the security guards and knocking the man off balance. His wild, bloodshot eyes locked directly onto me. I was standing perfectly still, my hands resting easily at my sides, watching his empire burn with absolute calm. That icy calm pushed him over the edge into pure psychosis. "You did this, Harrison," bellowed spittle flying from his lips as his face turned an unhealthy shade of purple. "You ruined my family. You destroyed everything I built. I will kill you." He lunged toward a nearby catering cart. His hand closed around the neck of a heavy, unopened bottle of vintage red wine. He hoisted the thick green glass bottle high into the air like a club and charged directly at me, his heavy footsteps pounding against the marble. The crowd screamed, high society men and women scattering in all directions to avoid the charging madman. Die, Gemma, he shrieked, swinging the heavy bottle downward toward my skull with every ounce of his remaining strength. I did not flinch. I did not even blink. I knew I was perfectly safe. Before the glass could even come close to my face, a massive shadow eclipsed Harrison. Donovan moved with a speed and ferocity that defied his sheer size. He stepped smoothly in front of me, becoming an impenetrable wall of muscle and suppressed rage. Donovan did not bother to block the incoming bottle. He simply let Harrison close the distance, planting his feet firmly on the marble floor. As Harrison brought the weapon down, Donovan pivoted his hips and unleashed a devastating steel-heavy punch directly into Harrison's jaw. The impact sounded like a baseball bat striking a block of wet cement. The sheer kinetic force of the blow was terrifying. The wine bottle flew from Harrison's hand, shattering against a marble pillar and sending a spray of dark red liquid across the floor like blood. Harrison's feet left the ground entirely. He was lifted backward by the brutal strike. He crashed down hard onto his back, sliding across the polished stone until he slammed into the base of the catering table. He lay there unmoving, his eyes rolled back in his head, a thick line of blood pooling from his shattered mouth. The entire ballroom fell completely silent. Even Kelsey stopped screaming, staring in absolute terror at the giant of a man who had just dismantled her father in a single effortless strike. Donovan slowly cracked his knuckles, rolling his broad shoulders as he looked down at the unconscious heap on the floor. He stepped forward, his heavy boots crunching over the broken glass of the wine bottle. He leaned over Harrison, his voice dropping to a low, lethal rumble that resonated in the chest of every person in the room. "Touch my daughter again." Donovan growled the deadly promise, freezing the air in the ballroom. "And I will chop off your hand." Donovan's voice still vibrated in the chests of everyone present. The massive ballroom was so silent you could hear the blood dripping from Harrison's split lip onto the pristine marble floor. Nobody dared to breathe. Nobody dared to move. I stood perfectly still, watching the shattered remains of my abuser lying in a pathetic heap. Suddenly, a heavy rhythmic thud echoed from the grand corridor outside. The locked oak doors of the ballroom did not just open, they were violently shoved apart. A squad of 12 federal agents stormed into the room. They wore dark tactical windbreakers with the letters FBI emblazoned across their backs in stark yellow text. They moved with absolute terrifying precision, fanning out to secure all exits while the lead agent marched directly down the center aisle. The Manhattan elite scrambled backward, pressing themselves against the silk-covered walls, desperate to distance themselves from the impending arrest. The lead agent, a tall woman with eyes like chipped ice, stopped a few feet from where Harrison lay groaning. She held up a thick bound folder bearing the heavy seal of the United States Department of Justice. "Harrison Sterling," the agent announced, her voice booming through the cavernous space. "We hold a federal warrant for your immediate arrest. You are being charged with 47 counts of corporate wire fraud, embezzlement, grand larceny, and the illicit fencing of stolen property across state lines." Harrison groaned, his eyes fluttering open. He spat a mouthful of blood and tried to push himself up, but his arms trembled violently. 2 agents stepped forward, grabbing him by the shoulders and hauling him roughly to his feet. Harrison swayed, his knees buckling, but the federal agents held him in an iron grip. "You have the right to remain silent." The lead agent continued, reading him his rights with mechanical efficiency. "I strongly suggest you use it." The cold, sharp sound of heavy metal ratcheting shut echoed perfectly in the quiet room. They slapped the steel handcuffs around Harrison's wrists, pulling his arms tightly behind his back. The proud, arrogant billionaire who had spent the entire evening boasting about his limitless wealth was now a bleeding, weeping criminal, being restrained like a common street thug. "Do not do this," Harrison whimpered. The fight completely drained out of him. He looked like a frightened, pathetic child. "Call my lawyers. Beverly, call the firm." "Your firm no longer exists," Mr. Sterling Caldwell interjected smoothly, adjusting his glasses. And as your primary creditor, Vanguard Logistics has already cooperated fully with the federal authorities. We handed over your servers 3 hours ago. There is no one left to call. The agents did not grant Harrison another second to plead. They spun him around and marched him back down the center aisle. The flashing red and blue lights of the federal transport vehicles outside painted the tall ballroom windows in manic strobing colors. Harrison dragged his feet, sobbing openly as he was hauled away to a federal holding cell. With Harrison gone, the entire weight of the catastrophe collapsed directly onto the women he left behind. Beverly was still kneeling on the marble floor. She stared at the empty space where her husband had just been arrested, her jaw hanging slack. Her perfectly contoured face was pale, streaked with ruined mascara, and twisted in a mask of absolute uncomprehending horror. She had bet her entire existence on Harrison's wealth. She had sold her soul, abandoned her eldest daughter, and built her life on a foundation of sheer greed. Now she was the wife of a bankrupt felon. Kelsey stared at her mother. For the past 20 minutes, Kelsey had watched her fiancé abandon her in disgust, discovered her diamond was a piece of cheap glass, and witnessed her father being arrested by the FBI. The human mind can only endure a specific amount of catastrophic trauma before it completely short-circuits. Kelsey's fragile narcissistic reality fractured entirely. The shock in Kelsey's eyes instantly morphed into a feral, rabid hatred. She did not direct this hatred toward me, nor toward the federal agents. She aimed it directly at the woman who had dragged her into this nightmare. Kelsey let out a blood-curdling shriek and lunged at her own mother. She tackled Beverly straight to the floor, her manicured nails extending like claws. Kelsey grabbed the collar of Beverly's custom silk gown and ripped it violently, the expensive fabric tearing with a loud, distinct sound. "You did this to me," Kelsey screamed, her voice tearing her throat raw. "You ruined my entire life!" Beverly cried out in pain as Kelsey's nails dragged across her bare shoulders, leaving bright red scratches on her skin. Beverly tried to push her daughter away, but Kelsey possessed the manic, adrenaline-fueled strength of a completely broken woman. "You promised me we were rich!" Kelsey shrieked, slapping her mother hard across the face. The sharp crack echoed through the ballroom. "You married a fraud. You tied me to a bankrupt, lying criminal. You told me I was going to be a Montgomery. You told me I was better than everyone else. Now I have nothing. I am wearing a fake ring. My fiancé hates me. The whole city is laughing at me. You ruined everything." Beverly sobbed, raising her arms to shield her face from her daughter's frantic blows. "Kelsey, stop it. I am your mother. I did not know. I swear I did not know." "You knew he was a monster!" Kelsey screamed back, her tears falling onto Beverly's ruined dress. "You just did not care because he bought you expensive bags. You sold me out to a bankrupt loser. I hate you. I hate you." The scene was a spectacularly pathetic display of absolute moral decay. The Manhattan elite watched in horrified fascination as the two women tore each other apart on the ballroom floor. They were like starving animals fighting over the scraps of a poisoned carcass. Mr. Dalton signaled frantically, and two of the country club security guards rushed forward. They had to physically pry Kelsey off her mother. Kelsey kicked and thrashed, screaming insults at Beverly, while Beverly lay curled in a fetal position, sobbing uncontrollably into the cold marble. I stood perfectly still, watching the toxic empire of my abusers devour itself from the inside out. I felt no pity. I felt no remorse. I felt only the clean, cold satisfaction of absolute justice. I turned to Caldwell and Donovan. "We are finished here," I said calmly. "Let them rot." I turned on my heel, ready to walk away from the suffocating atmosphere of the grand ballroom. I had delivered my justice. The empire of lies was reduced to ash, and I had no desire to spend another second breathing the same air as the people who had tormented me for decades. "Wait!" Beverly screamed. She violently shoved Kelsey away. Kelsey slumped back onto the cold marble, burying her face in the shredded remains of her custom engagement gown, utterly lost to her own hysteria. Beverly scrambled to her feet, her expensive high heels slipping dangerously on the slick surface of spilled wine and broken glass. She sprinted toward me, throwing her body into my path and physically blocking the heavy oak exit doors. Her perfectly contoured face was a horrific mess of smeared mascara and running foundation. The elegant, untouchable society matron had vanished, completely replaced by a cornered, desperate animal. She had just watched her husband get hauled away by federal agents. She had watched her daughter's billionaire fiancé walk out the door in absolute disgust. She knew she was facing total, unmitigated bankruptcy. She was drowning, and she saw my $40 billion net worth as her only remaining life raft. "You cannot just leave us here!" Beverly shrieked, her voice echoing wildly against the vaulted ceilings. "You cannot walk away from me. You owe me." I stopped. I did not step back. I simply stared at her, my face a mask of impenetrable ice. I waited for her to play her final pathetic card. "I carried you for 9 months!" Beverly raged, her chest heaving as she pointed a shaking, manicured finger directly at my face. She abandoned the groveling victim act and reverted instantly to the toxic, entitled manipulator she had always been. "I went through the sheer agony of childbirth for you. I put a roof over your head. I fed you. You sent your stepfather to federal prison. You completely ruined your sister's life. Look at her. She is destroyed because of your petty, vindictive jealousy." Beverly took a step closer, her eyes flashing with a rabid, delusional sense of authority. She was clinging to the title of mother as if it were a legally binding contract for unlimited funds. "You owe me your life, Gemma." Beverly spat, the venom dripping from every word. "You have to support me for the rest of my life. You have to buy me a new house. You have to maintain my standard of living. I am your mother. If you do not write me a check right now, I swear to God, I will go on national television. I will go to every news network, every magazine, and every morning talk show in the country. I will tell all of America what a cold, unfilial monster you are. I will ruin your precious corporate reputation. I will tell the whole world how you cruelly abandoned your own flesh and blood to rot in the streets." The remaining guests in the ballroom gasped, murmuring among themselves. It was a vicious, calculated threat. In the ruthless world of high society and corporate PR, a massive public scandal involving a billionaire abandoning her destitute mother could cause severe damage. Beverly knew how to play the media game. She was betting everything on the assumption that I would pay her off simply to avoid a public relations nightmare. I did not flinch. I did not even offer her a response. I did not need to. Before I could even part my lips, a massive, unyielding force stepped directly in front of me. Donovan moved with the silent, terrifying grace of an apex predator protecting its own. He completely blocked Beverly from my view, his broad shoulders shielding me from her toxic presence. He did not yell. He did not raise his deep, rumbling voice. He simply reached into the inner breast pocket of his heavy coat. He withdrew a folded, aged piece of paper. It was wrinkled, yellowed at the edges, and looked entirely out of place next to the crisp, modern legal documents Caldwell had been handling all night. Donovan flicked his wrist. He threw the crumpled piece of paper directly into Beverly's face. It hit her cheek before fluttering down to rest on the marble floor right at the tips of her ruined designer shoes. "Are you suffering from amnesia?" Donovan asked. His voice was a low, lethal rumble that instantly silenced the entire ballroom. "Or did the cheap champagne completely rot your brain?" Beverly stared down at the aged paper. The blood drained from her face so quickly she swayed on her feet. Her eyes widened in sudden, absolute terror as she recognized the faded ink and the official notary stamp at the bottom of the page. "Let me refresh your memory." Donovan continued, taking a slow, heavy step forward. 18 years ago, you were intercepting the child support checks I sent every month for Gemma. You were forging signatures, hiding the bank statements, and funneling my money into your own pathetic vanity projects while leaving my daughter to wear secondhand rags. I caught you. I had the bank records. I had the wire transfers. I was standing in a lawyer's office ready to send you to federal prison for wire fraud and severe child neglect. Beverly shrank back, shaking her head frantically, her hands coming up to cover her ears. "No, stop it. Do not say it. To stop me from suing you and putting you behind bars." Donovan stated his words, striking her like physical blows. "You begged for a deal. You signed that exact document lying at your feet. You permanently and irrevocably gave up your maternal rights. You traded your title as a mother to save your own skin. You took a final lump sum payout and legally severed all ties to Gemma. Caldwell stepped up beside Donovan, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. The corporate litigator was ready to deliver the final, crushing legal reality. Mr. Donovan is entirely correct, Caldwell announced, his voice projecting clearly to the captivated audience of Manhattan elites. We ran that specific document through the state registry this morning to ensure its absolute validity. Legally speaking, Beverly, you are not Ms. Gemma's mother. You have zero biological, legal, or moral claim to her or her vast assets. In the eyes of the law, Gemma is nothing to you but a cold-hearted creditor, and you are nothing but a delinquent debtor. Beverly's jaw dropped open. She tried to speak, but no sound came out. The ultimate manipulation tactic, her last desperate grasp for power and money, had been completely annihilated. She had tried to play the morality card only to have her own horrifying immorality exposed to the highest echelon of New York society. If you attempt to go to the media, Donovan added, leaning down slightly so his dark eyes locked directly onto hers, I will personally hand copies of this signed contract to every single journalist in the country. I will let them broadcast exactly how you sold your own child to avoid a prison sentence. Go ahead, Beverly. Make the call. Let us see how the morning talk shows respond to a mother who priced her daughter at $50,000 and a get-out-of-jail-free card. Beverly collapsed. Her knees simply gave out. She fell hard onto the marble floor, landing right beside the yellowed contract that proved she was a monster. She did not scream. She did not cry. The sheer magnitude of her complete and utter defeat had finally broken her spirit. She was truly, finally, entirely alone. I looked down at her one last time. I felt the comforting, solid presence of my real father standing beside me. I felt the absolute security of the life I had built for myself. I had survived the blizzard she threw me into, and I had returned as the storm. We are leaving, I said, my voice calm and perfectly steady. Donovan nodded. He placed a heavy protective hand on my shoulder and guided me toward the massive oak doors. Caldwell followed closely behind, his briefcase snapped tightly shut. The security guards pulled the doors open, revealing the cool, crisp night air of the city. I walked out of the Pinnacle Club without looking back, leaving Beverly and Kelsey to crawl through the shattered, bankrupt ruins of their entirely fabricated lives. My hand was on the brass handle of the heavy oak door when a frantic scrabbling sound echoed behind me. Beverly was not finished. She could not accept the absolute finality of the contract Donovan had thrown in her face. The realization that she was legally and financially severed from my wealth hit her with the force of a freight train. "Wait!" Beverly shrieked. Her voice was unrecognizable, stripped of all its cultured Upper East Side polish. It was the raw, desperate wail of a drowning woman. I turned slowly, my hand dropping from the door. Beverly was dragging herself across the polished marble floor. She did not care that her custom silk gown was soaking up spilled red wine. She did not care that hundreds of Manhattan's wealthiest elites were watching her with undisguised revulsion. She crawled toward me, her hands reaching out, her fingers slick with the remnants of her shattered dignity. She threw herself at my feet, her hands grasping wildly at the hem of my coat. Donovan immediately stepped forward, his massive frame tensing, ready to physically remove her. I held up a single hand, stopping him. I wanted to look at her. I needed to see this. "Gemma." "Please," Beverly sobbed. Her face was buried against my shoes. Tears and black mascara stained the leather. "You cannot do this. You are my daughter. I birthed you. I held you when you were a baby. You know I loved you. I had to sign that paper. Harrison made me do it. He said we would be ruined if I did not take Donovan's deal. I did it for our family. I did it so I could build a life and eventually come back for you. Please, I have nothing left. They took Harrison. They are going to take the house. Kelsey has no one. You have billions. You will not even notice a few million. Just give me enough to survive. I am begging you on my hands and knees. Have mercy on your own mother." She looked up at me. Her eyes were wide, bloodshot, and utterly devoid of pride. This was the woman who had spent my entire childhood telling me I was a burden. This was the woman who had locked me in my room during dinner parties because my cheap clothes embarrassed her. This was the woman who had allowed Harrison to verbally destroy me every single day, and now she was begging for my loose change. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. The part of my heart that had spent 20 years aching for a mother's love was completely permanently dead. In its place was a fortress of solid ice. I slowly leaned down. I crouched so that my face was only inches from hers. I forced her to look directly into my eyes. I wanted her to see exactly what she had created. "Do not ever call yourself my mother again," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the silence of the ballroom like a razor blade. "You sold that title 18 years ago for $50,000. You priced my worth, Beverly. You put a dollar amount on my existence, took the cash, and walked away without looking back once." Beverly whimpered, her hands shaking as she clung to my coat. "But I gave you life," she gasped, trying to play her final pathetic card of biological obligation. "I brought you into this world. You owe me for that. You owe me your life." I smiled. It was a cold, sharp expression that made Beverly physically recoil. I looked around the spectacular, ruined ballroom. I looked at the shattered crystal, the overturned catering tables, and the terrified, whispering guests who had gathered to celebrate my sister's fraudulent engagement. "I paid exactly $120,000 to rent this ballroom and host this party tonight." I stated my words, precise and lethal. "I paid for the vintage wine you are currently swimming in. I paid for the crystal chandeliers lighting your pathetic breakdown. I funded the very stage you used to humiliate yourself." I stood back up, towering over her. "Consider that $120,000 the final payment for the sheer inconvenience of giving birth to me," I declared, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling so every single person in the room could hear the final verdict. "I have bought my own life back. The debt is paid in full. From this exact second forward, we owe each other absolutely nothing. You are a stranger to me, Beverly, and I do not finance strangers." Beverly's mouth opened, but her vocal cords finally failed her. The ultimate truth crashed down upon her shoulders, crushing the last microscopic shred of her hope. She let go of my coat. Her hands fell limply to the marble floor. She collapsed inward, folding her body into a tight, trembling ball. She did not beg any more. She just wept, the sound pathetic and hollow. Across the room, Kelsey was watching. She was still sitting in the wreckage of her torn engagement dress, her fake diamond discarded somewhere in the chaos. Kelsey stared at her mother groveling on the floor, and then she looked up at me. There was no anger left in Kelsey's eyes. There was only absolute, terrifying emptiness. She finally understood that the Sterling family name, her wealth, her status, and her future were entirely obliterated. They were ghosts haunting their own funeral. I turned away from them. I looked at Donovan, who was watching me with an expression of profound, quiet pride. I looked at Caldwell, who gave a sharp, respectful nod. "We are done here," I said. I pushed the heavy oak doors open. The cool, crisp night air of Manhattan washed over me instantly, clearing the stifling, toxic atmosphere of the Pinnacle Club from my lungs. I stepped out onto the grand stone portico. The flashing lights of the federal transport vehicles were fading into the distance, taking Harrison away to a concrete cell. I walked down the sweeping marble staircase. With every step I took, the ghosts of my past fell away. The abused, neglected girl who used to hide in the shadows of the Sterling mansion was gone forever. I was Gemma Montgomery. I was untouchable. And as I stepped into the waiting black luxury sedan with my real father beside me, I knew my new life had finally begun. Before Donovan could even close the heavy door of the luxury sedan, a frantic, tearing sound echoed from the top of the marble staircase. The massive oak doors of the Pinnacle Club burst open once again. Kelsey stumbled out into the freezing night air, completely oblivious to the bitter chill. She had lost her designer heels in the chaos inside. Her bare feet slapped against the freezing stone steps. The shredded remains of her custom silk engagement gown dragged behind her like a dirty, discarded parachute. "Gemma, wait!" Kelsey screamed, her voice cracking as she sprinted down the staircase. She did not care about the valet drivers staring at her in absolute shock. She did not care about the remaining society reporters gathered near the curb, their relentless camera flashes illuminating her ruined makeup, her tangled hair, and her wild, bloodshot eyes. She lunged forward, throwing her entire body against the door of the sedan, physically blocking Donovan from shutting it. Donovan instantly stepped between us, his massive frame shielding me from her erratic movements, but I raised a single hand. I wanted to hear this. I wanted to witness the absolute unyielding bottom of Kelsey's delusion. "You cannot do this to me!" Kelsey gasped, her chest heaving as she struggled to catch her breath. Her hands gripped the edge of the car door, her knuckles turning bone white. "You have your revenge. You ruined my engagement. You sent my father to federal prison. But you cannot leave me with nothing. You have to help me." I sat comfortably against the plush leather seat, the interior of the car warm and quiet. My expression was a mask of completely impenetrable ice. "You left yourself with nothing, Kelsey," I replied quietly. I simply removed the blindfold so the rest of the world could see it. "The house," Kelsey blurted out, her eyes widening with a frantic, animalistic panic. "The Beacon Hill mansion. The lawyer just said Vanguard Logistics owns the debt. That means you own the house. You have to let us stay. You cannot kick us out tonight." It was a staggering display of sheer, unadulterated entitlement. Even after watching her entire world burn to ash, even after Travis Montgomery had thrown her to the floor in disgust, Kelsey still viewed me as a limitless resource. She still believed the universe owed her a life of unimaginable luxury, and she expected me to foot the bill. Why on earth would I do that? I asked, my voice calm and conversational, a sharp contrast to her manic hysteria. "Because you are a billionaire," Kelsey shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly down the quiet Manhattan street. "You have $40 billion. You own companies and high-rises and God knows what else. You have so many houses, Gemma. What does it matter if you give me one? Giving me one house means absolutely nothing to your bank account. I cannot live on the streets. I am a sterling. I cannot live in some disgusting tiny apartment like a commoner. We are family." She was not asking for forgiveness. She was demanding a handout. In her twisted, narcissistic mind, my vast wealth was a profound injustice unless it was actively serving her needs. I slowly leaned forward. I extended my left arm, pulling back the cuff of my tailored cashmere coat, just enough to glance at the face of my diamond-encrusted Patek Philippe watch. I tapped the crystal face twice, the sharp, rhythmic sound cutting through her hysterical, pathetic rambling. "My bank will arrive to officially seal and foreclose that mansion at exactly 8 o'clock tomorrow morning," I stated, my voice dropping to a temperature of absolute zero. "You have 12 hours to pack your cheap things and get off my property." Kelsey froze. The frantic, manic energy drained completely out of her body, replaced by a hollow, gaping shock. "Your property?" Kelsey whispered, shaking her head in denial. "You cannot kick us out. It is our family home. All my clothes are there, my jewelry, my designer bags, my entire life is in that house." "It was your father's leveraged collateral," Caldwell corrected smoothly. He stepped up beside Donovan, holding his sleek briefcase in one hand, completely unbothered by Kelsey's screaming. "Harrison Sterling defaulted on the mortgage 3 months ago. Vanguard Logistics purchased the defaulted loan. Miss Gemma is the sole proprietor of Vanguard. Therefore, the estate belongs entirely to her. You are currently trespassing on her goodwill, and that goodwill expires at dawn." Furthermore, Caldwell added, his tone brutally clinical, "I strongly advise against attempting to remove any valuables from the premises. The cars are leased under a holding company that is currently being seized by federal authorities. The jewelry and designer goods were flagged by the FBI as assets obtained via corporate wire fraud. If you attempt to leave the property with anything other than your basic necessities, you will be arrested for grand larceny before you even reach the front gates." "No," Kelsey whimpered, stepping backward as the reality of her total destitution finally crushed her. "No, you cannot take my things. Where are we supposed to go? How are we supposed to live? Perhaps you can ask Travis Montgomery to lend you a room?" I suggested, my tone dripping with lethal, unapologetic sarcasm. Oh, wait. He realized you are a grifter wearing a piece of synthetic glass. I suppose you will just have to figure it out the exact same way I had to figure it out when your mother threw me onto the street with absolutely nothing. At the top of the stairs, Beverly staggered out of the heavy club doors. She was clutching her torn dress to her chest, her face a mask of utter despair. She leaned heavily against the stone balustrade, looking down at the street. She had heard everything. The finality of the eviction hit her like a physical blow. She realized they did not even have the cash to pay for a taxi back to the mansion they were about to be thrown out of. She let out a low, agonizing wail and sagged against the cold stone. "You are a monster," Kelsey spat, her face twisting into an ugly, hateful sneer. The begging vanished entirely instantly, replaced by the vicious, cruel bully I had known my entire life. "You are just a jealous, bitter freak. You are doing this because I am beautiful and you are nothing. You want to see me suffer." "I do not care enough about you to want you to suffer, Kelsey," I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. "You are simply facing the natural, unavoidable consequences of your own actions. You built your entire life on stolen money, arrogance, and lies. Now the bill is due and your accounts are empty." I looked at Donovan. "Close the door," I instructed. Kelsey tried to hold on to the frame, but Donovan effortlessly peeled her fingers off the metal. He shoved her backward, not hard enough to injure her, but with enough sheer force to send her stumbling away from the vehicle. She landed hard on the concrete sidewalk, her bare knees scraping against the rough pavement. Donovan slammed the heavy car door shut, immediately sealing me inside the quiet, luxurious interior. He walked around the front of the sedan and climbed into the driver's seat, firing up the powerful engine. Through the tinted bulletproof glass, I watched Kelsey scramble to her knees. She pounded her fists against the side of the car, screaming obscenities that were completely muffled by the heavy soundproofing. The flashing cameras of the society reporters captured every single second of her degrading, pathetic tantrum. By tomorrow morning, the front page of every gossip column and financial paper in the country would feature the former Sterling heiress barefoot and screaming on the sidewalk. "Drive," I said. The luxury sedan pulled smoothly away from the curb, leaving Kelsey enveloped in a cloud of exhaust. She ran after the car for a few frantic steps before finally giving up. She collapsed onto the dirty curb, burying her face in her hands and weeping into the cold night. Beverly slowly made her way down the steps to join her daughter, two ruined women crying in the shadows of the elite world that had just violently rejected them. 12 hours, Caldwell noted from the front passenger seat, checking his phone. "I will have the private eviction team and local law enforcement waiting at the Beacon Hill gates at 7:45. They will monitor the packing process. They will ensure the Sterlings leave with absolutely nothing of value. Make sure they are escorted off the grounds precisely at 8. I commanded, leaning back into the soft leather and closing my eyes. They wanted to live like royalty on my stolen dime. Let them see exactly how the rest of the world survives. As Donovan navigated the heavy Rolls-Royce down the sweeping private driveway of the Pinnacle Club, the crisp night sky suddenly broke open. A brutal, freezing mix of sleet and heavy rain began to pour down instantly, turning the pristine Manhattan streets into a miserable, icy slush. The sudden storm was violent and unforgiving, dropping the temperature by 10 degrees in a matter of minutes. We approached the massive wrought iron security gates that separated the club's elite sanctuary from the public sidewalk. Through the rain-streaked window, I saw a scene that forced a slow, cold smile onto my lips. The Pinnacle Club security guards were marching Beverly and Kelsey down the long, winding driveway. They were not offering umbrellas. They were not offering assistance. Two burly men in dark suits had Beverly firmly by the elbows, practically dragging her forward. Another guard was marching behind Kelsey, loudly ordering her to keep moving off the private premises. The freezing sleet was absolutely merciless. Beverly's custom silk gown, already ruined by spilled wine and marble floors, was now clinging to her skin like a freezing wet shroud. Her perfectly styled hair plastered against her face in stringy dark clumps. Beside her, Kelsey was violently shivering, her teeth chattering so hard I could almost hear them through the soundproof glass. Her bare feet slapped against the freezing slush-covered asphalt. The former heiress was experiencing the harsh, unfiltered reality of the streets she had always mocked. Donovan slowed the Rolls-Royce as the security guards shoved the two women through the pedestrian gate, depositing them squarely onto the public curb. They were out in the storm, completely unprotected. "Stop the car," I said quietly. Donovan brought the massive vehicle to a gentle halt right at the edge of the gate. The tinted window hummed softly as I rolled it down. The bitter, freezing wind whipped into the heated cabin, carrying with it the frantic, desperate sounds of my former family. Beverly heard the hum of the window. She spun around, her face pale and streaked with dark, running makeup. When she saw me sitting in the plush, illuminated interior of the Rolls-Royce, a fresh wave of panic washed over her. She lunged toward the car, her hands smacking against the wet door panel. "Gemma," Beverly gasped, her voice trembling violently from the cold. "Please, you cannot leave us out here. It is freezing. We do not have our coats. The FBI confiscated my purse and my phone. We have absolutely nothing. Just call us a taxi. Please, just call a car to take us somewhere warm. You have the money. It will take you 2 seconds." Kelsey huddled behind her mother, wrapping her arms around her own shivering shoulders. She looked like a drowned rat. The sheer arrogance that had defined her entire existence had been completely washed away by the freezing sleet. She did not even have the energy to hurl insults anymore. She was just cold, terrified, and entirely dependent on my mercy. I sat perfectly still, listening to the rhythmic patter of the freezing rain hitting the roof of the car. I looked at Beverly's desperate, pleading eyes. I looked at her shivering hands. And then my mind transported me back 15 years. I saw the crowded, fluorescent-lit terminal of Gate 24. I felt the overwhelming panic of a teenage girl holding a tiny suitcase. I remembered the exact expression on Beverly's face as she handed me 2 crumpled bills, gave a casual, dismissive shrug, and walked away to board a first-class flight to Bali with her new husband. She had left me stranded, terrified, and completely alone, all so she could enjoy a luxurious vacation without the burden of her unwanted daughter. I reached into the inner pocket of my tailored coat. I withdrew a sleek, waterproof envelope. I opened it and pulled out a small, flat acrylic display case. Inside the protective casing sat a crisp, perfectly preserved piece of currency. It was a $100 bill. Right behind it was a second one. I had never spent the money she gave me that day. Even when I was starving, even when I was sleeping on cheap couches and working 3 minimum-wage jobs to survive, I had kept that money. I kept it as a daily reminder of exactly what I was worth to her. It was the fuel that drove my relentless ambition. It was the fire that built Vanguard Logistics. I popped the seal on the acrylic case. I pulled the 2 bills out the paper, feeling heavy and significant against my fingertips. "Donovan," the umbrella I commanded. Donovan instantly stepped out of the driver's side, opening a massive black golf umbrella. He walked around to my door and opened it, holding the canopy steady against the driving sleet. I stepped out of the warm Rolls-Royce. The freezing rain immediately hit my ankles, but I did not flinch. I stood tall, my heavy cashmere coat shielding me from the worst of the storm. Beverly looked up at me, her eyes widening with a sudden, desperate hope. She thought I was stepping out to help her. She thought she had finally broken through my icy exterior. I looked down at her, my expression completely void of empathy. The symmetry of the universe was absolute perfection. I held out the 2 bills. The wind whipped at the paper, threatening to tear it from my grasp. "Do you remember Gate 24? Beverly?" I asked. My voice was calm, cutting effortlessly through the sound of the storm. "Do you remember the exact words you said to me before you walked away to your luxury resort?" Beverly stared at the money. The blood drained from her already pale face as recognition dawned. Her jaw trembled not just from the freezing cold, but from profound, paralyzing horror. I let go of the bills. They fluttered in the freezing wind for a brief second before dropping straight into a filthy, icy puddle right at the tips of Beverly's ruined toes. $200, I stated, repeating the exact sentence she had carved into my memory over a decade ago. "Call an Uber yourself. You can figure it out." Beverly let out a strangled, agonizing sob. She dropped to her knees in the freezing slush, desperately reaching for the wet money. Kelsey collapsed beside her, wrapping her arms around her mother as they both wept openly on the Manhattan sidewalk. They were broken, destitute, and utterly alone in the cold. I did not feel a shred of guilt. I felt only closure. The grand ledger of my life was finally balanced. I turned around and stepped back into the luxurious heated cabin of the Rolls-Royce. Donovan smoothly shut the heavy door behind me. The instant the latch clicked into place, the thick, soundproof glass completely severed me from the outside world. The hysterical sobbing of the mother who had abandoned me and the sister who had tormented me vanished entirely. There was only the quiet hum of the engine and the soft, warm glow of the interior lights. "Take me home, Donovan," I said, leaning back and closing my eyes. The massive car pulled smoothly away from the curb, leaving the toxic remnants of the Sterling family behind, in the freezing rain, forever erased from my perfect, untouchable world. 6 months passed with the quiet, unstoppable force of a turning tide. The freezing, miserable sleet of that Manhattan winter felt like a distant nightmare, completely erased by the blinding golden sunshine of the Indian Ocean. I stood barefoot on the polished teak deck of my custom luxury yacht, the gentle sea breeze catching the lightweight silk of my summer dress. The water stretching out before me was a brilliant, impossible shade of turquoise, perfectly clear, all the way down to the vibrant coral reefs below. It was a picture of absolute untouched paradise. I was in the Maldives. 18 years ago, a terrified, unwanted 15-year-old girl had been abandoned at an airport gate, denied a trip to this exact destination because she was deemed a burden. Now I owned the multi-million-dollar vessel floating in its waters, and I had arrived entirely on my own terms. A silver tray clinked softly against a glass table behind me. I turned to see Donovan pouring a crisp, chilled vintage Sauvignon Blanc into 2 crystal glasses. He wore a relaxed linen shirt, his usually stern face softened by the tropical sun and the sheer peace of our surroundings. Beside him, lounging comfortably on a white leather sofa, was Caldwell. The corporate litigator had traded his sharp Manhattan suits for a casual polo, tapping away on a sleek tablet. "We just received the final updates from the New York bureau," Caldwell announced, his tone carrying a distinct note of professional satisfaction. "The trial concluded exactly an hour ago." I walked over, accepting the glass of wine Donovan offered me. I took a slow sip, the cool liquid, a sharp, pleasant contrast to the tropical heat. "Tell me," I said. "Harrison Sterling was formally sentenced to 10 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary," Caldwell stated, swiping across his screen. The judge showed absolutely no leniency. All of his remaining hidden assets, the offshore shell accounts, and the dummy corporations have been officially seized and liquidated by the federal government to pay back his defrauded investors. He will not see the outside of a concrete cell for a decade, and when he finally does get out, he will be a penniless, disgraced felon with a permanent criminal record. I looked out at the rolling waves, feeling a profound, quiet stillness settle over my chest. Harrison was gone. The man who had terrorized my childhood, who had built an empire of glass and lies, had finally shattered his own world. "And what about his darling wife and daughter?" Donovan asked, taking a seat across from Caldwell. His deep voice rumbled with a protective, fierce loyalty. Caldwell allowed a rare, grim smile to touch his lips as he pulled up a series of images from a private investigator's report. He turned the tablet so we could both see the screen. "The fall of the Sterling women has been nothing short of spectacular," Caldwell noted. I looked at the high-resolution photographs. They were completely unrecognizable. The first image showed Kelsey, the former high society darling who had once demanded custom engagement gowns and private ballroom galas, was standing behind the greasy counter of a cheap 24-hour fast food franchise on the decaying outskirts of Queens. She was wearing a hideous, oversized polyester uniform. Her once perfect, heavily styled hair was shoved into a mandatory, unflattering hairnet. The harsh fluorescent lighting overhead illuminated the deep, exhausted bags under her eyes and the angry red grease burns spotting her forearms. She was ringing up a customer's order, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated misery. She works double shifts just to make rent. Caldwell explained, his voice entirely devoid of pity. No one in her former social circle will even take her calls. The moment the Sterling name became synonymous with federal fraud, her elite friends blocked her number. Travis Montgomery ensured she was blacklisted from every reputable corporate job in the tri-state area. And Beverly, I asked, my voice cool and steady. Caldwell swiped to the next photograph. It showed the exterior of a crumbling brick apartment building in a notoriously dangerous, impoverished neighborhood. The next photo was taken through a dirty window, showing the interior of a tiny roach-infested studio apartment. The peeling wallpaper hung in sad strips, and a single flickering bulb illuminated a cheap stained mattress on the floor. They lived together in that single room, Caldwell said. And according to the neighbors, it is a living hell. Beverly is trapped there, entirely dependent on Kelsey's minimum wage income to survive. But the true poetry of the situation is their dynamic. Kelsey resents her mother entirely. She screams at Beverly day and night, blaming her for the loss of their wealth, for the humiliation of the trial, and for her ruined engagement. Kelsey treats her mother with the exact same vicious, cruel hostility that Beverly used to inflict on you. I stared at the image of the decaying apartment. The golden child had finally mutated into a monster, and she was turning all her toxic, venomous rage directly onto her creator. Beverly was spending her final years trapped in a squalid box, relentlessly punished by the only person she had ever truly loved. They were drowning each other, locked in a miserable, suffocating prison of their own making. Caldwell powered off the tablet, placing it face down on the table. The Sterling family is officially erased, he said softly. I looked down at the crystal glass in my hand. For years, I had believed that I needed an apology to heal. Society constantly preaches that victims must find a way to forgive their abusers to find peace, that blood is an unbreakable bond that must eventually be mended. But standing on the deck of my yacht, surrounded by endless blue water and people who genuinely protected me, I realized that was a complete lie. Forgiveness was not about reconciling with toxic people. It was not about letting them back into your life or making peace with their cruelty. True forgiveness was surgical. It was the deliberate, unapologetic act of cutting out the poison completely. It was reclaiming your own power, stepping out of their dark, twisted shadows, and allowing yourself to live a brilliant, extraordinary life. I had survived the blizzard they forced me into, and I had returned as a force of nature they could not comprehend. I had taken back my dignity, my wealth, and my future. I was completely free. I turned to Donovan. My real father was watching me, his dark eyes reflecting the bright tropical sun, shining with an unwavering, unconditional pride that I had spent my entire life searching for. To freedom, I said, raising my glass toward the vast, glittering horizon. To freedom, Donovan echoed, his deep voice carrying over the sound of the ocean as he tapped his glass against mine. I took a sip of the sweet wine, turned my face up to the warm, brilliant sun, and smiled. I was finally truly home, and I would never look back again. The power of radical independence. The most profound lesson embedded in these narratives of betrayal and sweet revenge is that seeking validation from those committed to misunderstanding you is a losing battle. When a family dynamic is built on a foundation of conditional love, where one sibling is the untouchable golden child and the other is the designated scapegoat, no amount of sacrifice, loyalty, or achievement will ever rewrite their deeply ingrained script. The protagonist's journey highlights the painful but necessary realization that toxic relatives will gaslight, belittle, and manipulate reality just to maintain their illusion of superiority and control. The turning point in these stories occurs not when the victim finally proves her worth to her abusers, but when she realizes her worth is entirely independent of their approval. The secret weapon, whether it is financial independence and undeniable talent, or hard evidence of betrayal, acts as a catalyst for severing the toxic bond. True justice is rarely about malicious vengeance. Rather, it is about the radical, unapologetic act of choosing oneself. It is the swift establishment of ironclad boundaries and the absolute refusal to remain a pawn in someone else's dysfunction. By stepping out of the shadow of a prescribed role, the protagonist reclaims her agency, transforming years of trauma into the very fuel needed to build a thriving, authentic life. Ultimately, the most satisfying retaliation is not a dramatic confrontation, but a life brilliantly lived. Healing begins the exact moment you stop waiting for an apology that will never come and start investing that energy into your own unshakable future. If you are currently shrinking yourself to fit into a space where your true value goes unrecognized, take the first step today to reclaim your narrative and walk toward the freedom you deserve.